This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. I'm still not sure if writing it down will help or just make the nightmares worse, but I need to tell someone who might believe me. This happened back in 2019 when I was living with my mom and younger brother in this small apartment complex on the outskirts of Rochester, Minnesota. Nothing fancy, just a basic two-bedroom unit on the second floor. Our building backed up to this massive cornfield that stretched for what seemed like miles. The location was creepy enough on its own. No streetlights out there, just darkness beyond our parking lot. The only light at night came from this sad little illuminated sign at the entrance to the complex. My bedroom window faced that cornfield. During the day, it was just a normal view. Corn stalks, sky, occasional birds. But at night, complete darkness, like looking into a void. I remember the night it started so clearly. It was mid-October, around midnight. I couldn't sleep. Typical insomnia issues, so I was playing my keyboard with headphones on. I had this little electronic piano set up by the window because it was the only spot that fit in my cramped room. I was learning this melancholy Chopin piece, nothing special. I happened to glance up between practicing measures, and that's when I saw it, this black goat, just standing at the edge of the cornfield across the street. At first I thought, oh, somebody's farm animal got loose, which isn't that weird in rural Minnesota. But something about it made me pause. It was just standing there, not grazing, not moving, just staring in the direction of our building. I should mention I'd recently watched this horror movie with a demonic goat in it with my boyfriend, so I was already a bit on edge about goats in general. I tried ignoring it and went back to playing. But a few minutes later, I looked up again, and it had moved. Not just a little bit. It was now standing in the middle of the street, directly facing our apartment building. I'm not usually the jumpy type, but something about this felt wrong. The way it was positioned, how still it was. It didn't move like a normal animal. I pulled my curtains closed and moved away from the window, tried to rationalize it. Probably just a loose goat, nothing supernatural. But my heart was racing. I moved to my bed and scrolled through TikTok for about an hour, trying to distract myself, but the curiosity was killing me. I kept thinking about that goat just standing there, watching our building. Eventually, I had to look again. I slowly parted the curtains just enough to peek out. What I saw made my blood run cold. The goat was now on our apartment complex grounds, standing directly under the illuminated sign at the entrance. And in that sickly yellow light, I could see it clearly for the first time. It wasn't standing on hooves. It had hands, actual fucking hands. Gray, mangled human-like hands with these impossibly long, skinny fingers that bent at unnatural angles. They were gnarled, like arthritic hands, but stretched out with these yellowed, cracked nails. And it was using them to stand, like some kind of horrific perversion of how a goat should look. I jerked back from the window so fast I knocked over my bedside lamp. I thought I was hallucinating. Had to be. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Maybe it was just a weird shadow playing tricks on my eyes. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. I couldn't stay in that room. No way. I grabbed my blanket and pillow and went to sleep on the living room couch. Told myself I'd deal with it in the morning. Maybe even laugh about it. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little noise had me jumping. The refrigerator humming, the heating system clicking on, my brother turning over in his sleep in the other room. I kept imagining those hands crawling up the side of our building, those fingers tapping on the window. When morning finally came, I felt ridiculous. Daylight has a way of making nighttime fears seem silly. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing until I went back to my room. There, on the outside of my second-floor window, was a handprint, not a normal handprint. This was greasy, almost oily, with these long finger streaks that stretched down the glass, and caught in the oily residue were several coarse black hairs. I screamed. My mom came running in, and when I showed her, she was confused, but not as freaked out as she should have been. She thought some neighborhood kid had climbed up somehow as a prank. Maybe they used a ladder, she suggested, but I knew better. We were on the second floor, and there was no easy way to access my window from outside. No balcony, no fire escape, nothing to climb on. I tried explaining what I'd seen the night before, but my mom just gave me that look, the one that says, "My daughter is being dramatic again." She cleaned the handprint off with Windex and told me to stop watching horror movies before bed, but I couldn't shake what I'd seen. Those weren't human hands on my window. The fingers were too long, too wrong, and those black hairs weren't from any person. I stayed at my boyfriend's place that night and the next. Within a week, I'd moved most of my essential stuff to his apartment across town. Told my mom it was because his place was closer to my job, but the truth was, I couldn't stand being in that bedroom anymore. That's when the nightmares started. At first, they were just standard scary dreams, being chased, falling, typical stuff. But gradually they changed, became more specific, more vivid, and in every single one, somewhere in the background, was that goat, sometimes just watching from a distance, sometimes moving closer, those horrible hands dragging it forward in a jerky, unnatural motion. The worst one, the one that still makes me cold when I think about it, happened about a month after I moved in with my boyfriend. In the dream, I was wearing this old-fashioned dress, like something from Salem witch trial times. Long wool skirt, white bonnet, the whole Puritan outfit. I was walking out of these foggy woods toward what looked like an old colonial village. Everything felt so real. The weight of the damp wool against my legs, the bite of the cold morning air, the squish of mud under my shoes. I could smell wood smoke from the village and hear distant voices, but I felt this presence behind me, watching from the tree line. When I turned to look, there it was. The goat, partially hidden among the trees, those terrible hands gripping the bark of a pine tree. It was pulling itself up the trunk, climbing like no animal should be able to climb, those fingers flexing and grasping, and its eyes, God, its eyes were fixed on me, following my every movement. In the dream, I tried to run toward the village, but my legs were so heavy. Each step felt like wading through cement. The voices from the village changed, turning into screams, and when I looked back again, the goat was closer, moving through the trees in this horrible, spidery way, those hands pulling it forward faster than should be possible. I woke up to my boyfriend shaking me. Apparently, I'd been twitching and making these awful whimpering sounds in my sleep. He said I was ice cold to the touch, like I'd been outside in winter weather. I was shivering uncontrollably for almost an hour afterward. That was 6 months ago. I haven't been back to my mom's apartment since. I drive the long way to work to avoid even passing by that cornfield. The nightmares come and go. Sometimes I'll go weeks without one, and I'll start to think maybe it's over. But then I'll have another, each one more detailed than the last. In the most recent one, the goat spoke to me. I won't repeat what it said. I can't. I've tried researching local folklore, looking for anything about goats with hands or cornfield creatures. Nothing matches what I saw. I've considered therapy, but what would I say? I'm being stalked by a goat thing with human hands? They'd put me on antipsychotics before I finished the sentence. Sometimes I wonder if I should go back there, confront whatever it was, but then I remember those fingers on my window, those black hairs, and I know I can't. The strangest part? Last week, my brother called, said he was hearing scratching sounds outside his window at night, said he found weird prints in the dirt under his window. Not hoof prints, not footprints, but something in between. I didn't tell him what I saw that night. I couldn't. Instead, I suggested he stay with a friend for a while. He laughed it off. I check in on him every day now. So far, he's fine. But I can't shake this feeling that something is waiting, watching, remembering me. I don't know what that thing in the cornfield was. I don't know why it came to my window or why it haunts my dreams. All I know is that it was real, and sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I swear I can hear the faint sound of hands, not hooves, walking across the roof above my bedroom. Story 2. Ivy never really shared this with anyone outside my immediate circle, but what happened when I was 13 still makes my skin crawl. I'm 24 now, and I still can't explain it. I've gone over it in my head thousands of times, and I always reach the same conclusion. Some things just don't have logical explanations. It was summer break, sometime in early July. I remember it was hot as hell outside, so I was spending the afternoon in my room with the AC blasting. I lived in Lakeview, one of those cookie-cutter suburbs where nothing interesting ever happens, or at least that's what I thought. I was FaceTiming with my best friend Jordan, something we did almost daily that summer. My parents were both at work, and I was just hanging out with my dog, Baxter, a golden retriever who kept trying to get my attention by dropping his slobbery tennis ball on my lap. Jordan was at her house, also alone since her mom was at work and her older brother was at football practice. Jordan had propped her iPad on her vanity while she was cleaning out her closet. I could see her bedroom in the frame, her vanity with all her makeup and stuff, the chair pushed in, and just the plain white wall behind it. Nothing special, nothing that would make you think anything weird was about to happen. I wasn't even really paying attention to the screen most of the time. I was more focused on trying to keep Baxter from drooling all over my bed while we played fetch inside the house, which my mom would have killed me for if she knew. Jordan was rambling about some boy from school she had a crush on, and I was half listening, occasionally glancing at my iPad. That's when I first noticed it. The chair at Jordan's vanity moved, just a tiny bit, like maybe an inch. At first I thought I was seeing things, or maybe the iPad had shifted slightly. I didn't say anything because it seemed so insignificant. But then I looked again a minute later, and the chair had definitely moved another inch or two away from the vanity. "Hey, Jordan," I said, interrupting her story about the boy. "What?" she asked, her voice coming from somewhere off-screen, inside her closet. "Did you just move your chair?" "No, I'm in my closet." "Why?" I stared at the screen. The chair was now about a foot away from where it had originally been. "Your chair is moving," I said, my voice getting higher with each word. "What do you mean?" Jordan came into frame, looking confused. She was holding a pile of clothes she'd been sorting. "Look at your chair. It's not where it was before." Jordan turned to look at the chair, and I could see her face change. She went pale, her eyes widening. "I didn't touch it, Maddie," she said quietly. "I've been in my closet this whole time." We both stared at the chair through the screen. Neither of us said anything for a moment. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. "Maybe the floor is uneven," I suggested, trying to find a logical explanation. "Or maybe it's just the angle of the iPad." But we both knew those explanations didn't make sense. The chair kept moving, slowly sliding further away from the vanity while we watched. I could see Jordan's entire room in the frame. There was no one else there, no strings attached to the chair, nothing that could explain what was happening, and then it happened. The chair, which had been gradually moving away from the vanity, suddenly flew backward with force, slamming into the wall behind it with a loud bang. It wasn't a gentle movement anymore. It was violent, deliberate. We both screamed. I nearly dropped my iPad, and Jordan stumbled backward, almost falling. "What the fuck, what the fuck, what the fuck?" Jordan kept repeating, her voice shaking. I couldn't speak. My mouth had gone completely dry and my hands were trembling. Baxter started barking frantically, picking up on my fear. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute of shocked silence, Jordan slowly approached the chair. I wanted to tell her not to touch it, but I couldn't find my voice. She carefully moved it back to its original position at the vanity, her hands visibly shaking. "This is so fucking weird," she whispered, looking around her room. "I'm home alone. There's nobody else here." "Are you sure?" I asked, finally finding my voice. "Could your brother have come home early?" "No. He texted me like 20 minutes ago saying practice was running late." Jordan was still looking around her room nervously. "I need to get some trash bags from downstairs for all these old clothes. I'll be right back." Before I could tell her not to leave, she was gone. I sat there, staring at the empty room on my screen, my heart still racing. Baxter had settled down and was now lying beside me, but I could tell he was still on edge. That's when I saw it. Something dropped down into the frame from above, where the ceiling would be. It looked like a rope, hanging in front of the camera. Not just any rope, a fucking noose. A goddamn noose hanging right there in Jordan's bedroom. I screamed and immediately hung up. I threw my iPad across the bed like it was on fire and burst into tears. Baxter started barking again, jumping off the bed and running to my door, scratching at it like he wanted to get out. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I couldn't breathe properly. It felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I kept seeing that rope dangling in front of the camera, perfectly shaped into a noose. I was only 13, but I knew exactly what it was and what it meant. My phone started ringing, Jordan calling me back. I didn't want to answer, but I was terrified for her. What if something was in her house? What if she was in danger? I finally picked up on the fourth ring. "Maddie, why did you hang up?" Jordan sounded confused and a little annoyed. "The rope," I managed to say through my tears. "The noose. Did you see it?" "What are you talking about? What noose?" "When you went downstairs, something dropped down in front of your camera. It looked like a rope tied into a noose." My voice was barely a whisper now. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Maddie, I don't have any rope in my room," Jordan finally said, her voice dead serious. "And I definitely don't have a noose. That's not a funny joke." "I'm not joking. I swear to God I saw it." I was crying harder now, partially from fear and partially because she didn't believe me. "Let me check my room," she said. I could hear her footsteps as she went back upstairs. A few moments later, she spoke again. "There's nothing here, Maddie. No rope, no noose, nothing hanging from my ceiling." "But I saw it," I insisted, though doubt was starting to creep in. Had I imagined it? Was my mind playing tricks on me after seeing the chair move? "Well, it's not here now," Jordan said firmly. "But the chair thing definitely happened. I saw that too." We stayed on the phone for another hour, trying to make sense of what had happened. Jordan searched her entire room, but found nothing unusual. No rope, no explanation for the moving chair. We both agreed that what we'd seen was real, at least the chair part. Jordan wasn't convinced about the noose, but she could tell I was genuinely terrified. I considered the possibility that Jordan might have been pranking me. Maybe she had some elaborate setup with fishing line to move the chair, and maybe she had dangled something in front of the camera when she claimed to be downstairs. But the look on her face when she saw the chair move was genuine shock. I've known Jordan since we were 5. I can tell when she's lying. Plus, we've remained best friends for the past 11 years, and she's never once admitted to pranking me that day. We've talked about it many times over the years, trying to make sense of it, and her story has never changed. She insists she had nothing to do with the chair moving, and she never saw any rope or noose in her room. The more I've thought about it over the years, the more convinced I've become that what we experienced was something paranormal. Jordan's family moved out of that house 2 years after the incident, not because of anything supernatural, just because her dad got a job in another state. But she told me once that strange things continued to happen in that house until they left. Objects would move slightly when no one was looking. Doors would open on their own. Once, all the cabinets in the kitchen were found open in the morning when everyone swore they'd been closed the night before. I've never experienced anything like that day again, thank God. But it completely changed how I see the world. Before that, I was skeptical about ghosts and the supernatural. Now, I know better. Some things just can't be explained by logic or science. The image of that chair flying into the wall still haunts me, and sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I still see that rope hanging in front of the camera, swaying slightly as if moved by an invisible hand. I've tried to convince myself that I imagined the noose part, that it was just my terrified 13-year-old brain misinterpreting something else. But deep down, I know what I saw. I don't know what was in Jordan's house that day. I don't know what moved the chair or dangled that rope. But whatever it was powerful enough to make its presence known to 2 teenage girls over a FaceTime call. And that's what terrifies me the most. The idea that whatever it was, it wanted us to see it. It wanted us to know it was there. Jordan and I don't talk about it much anymore. We've both tried to move on with our lives, but sometimes, when we're together and the conversation lulls, I can tell we're both thinking about it, about the day something impossible happened and neither of us could explain it. I've researched paranormal phenomena since then, trying to find similar stories or explanations. I've found plenty of accounts of objects moving on their own, but nothing quite like what we experienced. The directness of it, the way it seemed to escalate from subtle movement to violent action, and then the noose. It feels deliberate, like a message. But what that message was supposed to be, I still don't know. All I know is that it happened, and 11 years later I still have no explanation for what I saw that day. Story 3. I've never told anyone the full extent of what's been happening to me. Most people just dismiss it as regular sleep paralysis, but I know it's something more. I've had sleep paralysis for as long as I can remember, but what I'm experiencing now is different. It's targeted, deliberate, and I think it's slowly killing me. I'm 22, living alone in Lakeside, one of those small towns where nothing interesting is supposed to happen. My name's Nathan, and I've been dealing with this nightmare for years, but it's gotten much worse in the last few months. Last night was the breaking point. I'm still shaking as I type this. I've always had to sleep in specific positions, either flat on my back or with my back pressed against the wall. If I try to sleep any other way, I feel these hands, invisible hands touching my body. They start at my feet and work their way up, like someone's feeling every inch of me. It happens even though I'm completely alone in my bedroom. I've checked everywhere, under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains. Nothing's there, but the hands still come. The worst part about my sleep paralysis is how I wake up into it. I don't just open my eyes and realize I can't move. Instead, I wake up with absolutely no memory of where I am or how I got there. It's terrifying. For those first few seconds, I'm completely disoriented, trying to figure out what's happening. My brain scrambles to make sense of things, and there's always this creeping feeling that someone was just with me seconds before I woke up, someone who shouldn't be there. Last night I went to bed around 11:30. Nothing unusual about the evening. I had dinner, watched some Netflix, scrolled through my phone for a bit. Normal stuff. I remember checking that my doors were locked. I always do this now before heading to bed. I fell asleep pretty quickly. I woke up at exactly 3:18 according to my bedside clock. The first thing I noticed was that I couldn't move. My arms and legs felt like they were made of concrete. My chest felt tight like someone was sitting on it. I tried to scream, but nothing came out, just a pathetic wheezing sound. Then I felt it, that horrible sensation that something was trying to force me back to sleep. It's hard to explain if you've never experienced it, but it's like there's this pressure pushing against your consciousness, trying to drag you under, and I absolutely knew, that if I fell back asleep, I wouldn't wake up again. I've learned the hard way what happens when I give in to that pull. A few months ago, I let myself drift during one of these episodes, just to see what would happen. Big mistake. My breathing started to slow down, becoming more and more shallow. My heartbeat dropped to a crawl. I could feel myself slipping away like I was being drained. I fought my way back, but it was close. Too close. After that, I started researching sleep paralysis. I came across stories about the Hag, this evil entity that supposedly sits on people's chests during sleep paralysis. According to folklore, it feeds on your fear or life force or something. I'd have dismissed it as superstitious nonsense before all this started happening to me. But last night, there was no denying what I saw. As I lay there paralyzed, I felt the weight on my chest increase. Then I saw it, this shadowy figure squatting right on top of me. It didn't have a face, just this dark void where features should be. But somehow, I knew it was staring directly at me. It wore what looked like a hood or hat, and its body was bent forward in this unnatural position, leaning toward my face. The room was dark, but not dark enough that I shouldn't have been able to make out more details. It's like the figure was made of darkness itself, darker than the shadows around it. It didn't move much, just this slight swaying motion, like it was breathing me in. I tried everything I could to move, focusing all my energy on just wiggling a finger or toe. Nothing worked. I was completely at its mercy. The figure stayed there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then it leaned in closer, and I swear I could feel its breath on my face, cold and stale, like air from a tomb. That's when I noticed my breathing was getting shallower. Each breath was harder to take than the last. With every ounce of strength I had, I managed to break free from the paralysis, just enough to gasp loudly. The figure jerked back, almost surprised, and then it was gone. Not like it ran away or faded, it was just instantly not there anymore. I sat up, gulping air into my lungs, my heart pounding like it was trying to burst out of my chest. The clock now read 3:27. Only 9 minutes had passed, but it felt like an eternity. I couldn't go back to sleep after that. I turned on every light in my apartment and sat in the living room until morning, jumping at every creak and shadow. This isn't the first time I've seen the figure. It's been appearing more frequently over the past few months. At first, I thought they were just hallucinations, my brain creating images from my fears. That's what all the medical websites say about sleep paralysis. But I'm not so sure anymore. I've tried to document these episodes. I set up a camera in my room to record while I sleep. Most nights, nothing happens, or at least nothing shows up on camera. But sometimes there are anomalies, cold spots that show up as dark patches on the thermal imaging app I installed, unexplained static or interference right around the time I experience an episode. Once, the camera shut off completely at 3:15 a.m. and turned back on at 3:32. That was the night I had one of my worst encounters. I've shown the footage to some friends, asking for rational explanations. Most of them just shrug it off. It's just a technical glitch, or maybe you bumped the camera in your sleep. Some have suggested I'm experiencing anxiety or that it's all just coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. Not after what I've seen. Not after what I've felt. The entity, I've started calling it the midnight figure, seems to have a pattern. It almost always appears between 3 and 4 in the morning. It always comes when I'm alone, and it always tries to push me back into sleep. I've tried everything to stop these episodes. I've changed my diet, avoided caffeine and alcohol, established a regular sleep schedule, tried meditation, kept a dream journal. Nothing works. I've even tried sleeping pills, but they just make it worse. They make me too groggy to fight back when the paralysis hits. The only thing that seems to work is having someone else in the room. When my cousin stayed over for a week last month, I didn't have a single episode. Not one. As soon as he left, the midnight figure returned that very night, almost as if it was waiting for me to be alone again. That's what convinces me this isn't just sleep paralysis. Whatever this thing is, it's intelligent. It knows when I'm vulnerable. It retreats when there might be witnesses. Last night was different, though. Last night it felt like the figure was feeding. I could actually feel something being pulled out of me as it leaned in. My energy, my life force, my soul. I don't know what to call it, but something was being taken. I checked myself in the mirror this morning. I look like hell, dark circles under my eyes, pale skin, and I've lost weight without changing my diet. I look like I'm wasting away, and maybe I am. I'm scared to go to sleep tonight. I've asked a friend to crash at my place, but he can't make it until tomorrow, so tonight I'm on my own again. I've set up more cameras. I've got a voice recorder running. I've even drawn symbols of protection around my bed. Desperate measures from someone who never believed in the supernatural before all this started. Part of me feels crazy for even writing this down. If I read someone else's post about a shadow creature that visits them at night, I'd probably think they were making it up or needed psychiatric help. But I know what I've experienced. I know what I've seen. The worst part is not knowing what it wants. Is it just feeding on my fear? Is it slowly draining my life away? Or is it building up to something worse? I called my doctor today and tried to explain what's been happening. He suggested I see a sleep specialist and prescribed some new medication. I didn't tell him about the figure. What would be the point? He'd just think I was having hallucinations. Tonight I'm going to try to stay awake. I've got energy drinks, coffee, and my laptop. I'll watch movies, browse the internet, do whatever it takes to avoid falling asleep. But I know I can't do this forever. Eventually, exhaustion will win, and I'll have to sleep. And when I do, I know it'll be waiting for me. If anyone has experienced something similar or knows what this thing might be, please let me know. I'm running out of options, and honestly, I'm afraid of what will happen if this continues. I keep thinking about what my grandmother used to say about evil spirits that prey on the sleeping. She had all these superstitions that I used to laugh at. I'm not laughing anymore. It's getting dark outside now. In a few hours it'll be midnight, and then 3 a.m. will follow. The witching hour, they call it. I never understood why until now. I don't know if I'll make it through another night with this thing. Each visit seems to take more out of me than the last. I feel like I'm fighting a losing battle against something I don't understand. If you're reading this and you've never experienced sleep paralysis, count yourself lucky. And if you have, but it's just the normal kind, the scientifically explainable kind, count yourself lucky too, because what I'm dealing with isn't normal. It isn't just my brain playing tricks on me. There's something in my room at night, something that wants something from me. And I don't know how much longer I can keep it from taking it. Story 4. I still can't believe what happened to me last winter in Northlake. I've been hesitant to share this because I know how it sounds, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it. My friend Dana and I had been planning this camping trip for months. We're both experienced campers. But this was our first winter excursion together in the boreal forests of Northlake, Canada. We'd heard about how beautiful the forest becomes after a light snowfall, the way the trees sparkle in the moonlight, how quiet everything gets. It seemed magical in theory. We arrived at our campsite around 3 in the afternoon. The sky was already darkening, typical for winter in northern Canada. We quickly set up our tent and organized our gear. Everything was going smoothly. We were laughing, taking pictures, completely carefree. Dana is usually the more prepared one between us, but I'd packed all the essentials this time. Extra layers, emergency supplies, my hunting knife, flashlight. The only thing I'd forgotten was my whistle, which seems like such a small thing until you actually need it. As evening approached, we realized we needed more firewood. Our small pile wouldn't last through the night, and temperatures were expected to drop below freezing. Dana was finishing up with dinner prep, so I volunteered to gather more wood. "I'll be quick," I told her, grabbing my flashlight. "Just going to collect what's nearby." "Don't go too far," she warned. "It'll be completely dark soon." I remember nodding, completely confident. I'd been camping dozens of times before. What could possibly go wrong? The forest was already transitioning into that eerie twilight phase where shadows seemed to move on their own. I walked about 50 yards from our campsite, picking up fallen branches and dry wood where I could find it. Small snowflakes had started falling, nothing serious, just enough to dust the ground. It was peaceful, really. I don't know exactly when I realized I'd gone too far. Maybe it was when the trees started looking unfamiliar, or when I couldn't see the glow from our campfire anymore. One minute I was gathering wood, and the next I was standing in a clearing I didn't recognize, arms full of branches, with no idea which direction I'd come from. The snow was falling heavier now, not quite a blizzard, but enough to obscure my vision beyond 20 feet or so. I dropped the wood and pulled out my flashlight, scanning the trees around me. Everything looked the same. Tall pines and spruce trees, their branches heavy with snow, creating identical shadows in every direction. "Dana!" I called out, trying to keep the panic from my voice. No response. I tried again, louder this time. "Dana, can you hear me?" Nothing but the soft hiss of falling snow. That's when the first wave of real fear hit me. I'm not usually one to panic, but there's something about being lost in the woods at night that triggers something primal. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. Why would there be? We were miles from civilization. I tried to retrace my steps, but the light snow had already covered my tracks. Every direction looked exactly the same. The rational part of my brain kept saying, "Just stay put, she'll come looking for you." But another part was screaming, "Move, find your way back." I decided to pick a direction and walk slowly, calling out every few steps. The temperature was dropping fast, and while I was dressed for the cold, standing still wasn't an option. I'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind. The forest makes all kinds of noises, especially at night. But this was different. A long, mournful sound that wasn't quite a howl, wasn't quite a scream. It reminded me of the grief-stricken wailing you might hear at a funeral, but distorted, inhuman. It echoed through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My blood ran cold. I've heard wolves before, coyotes too. This wasn't either of those. It wasn't any animal I recognized. "Dinah?" I called again, my voice shaking now. "Is that you?" No answer. Just the sound of snow falling and my own ragged breathing. I swept my flashlight across the tree line, trying to locate the source of that terrible sound. That's when I saw it, perched on a large rock about 30 yards away. At first glance, it looked like a wolf, or maybe a large coyote. 4 legs, angular face, pointed ears. But as I focused my light on it, I realized it was much too large. I'm no wildlife expert, but I know what wolves look like, and this thing was at least twice the size it should have been. Its proportions were wrong too. Legs too long, face too angular, almost stretched. But the eyes, God, the eyes. They were huge, far larger than any canines should be, and they didn't catch the light from my flashlight like animal eyes should. Everyone knows animal eyes reflect light in the dark, glowing red or green. These eyes absorbed my flashlight beam like black holes, wide and deep, like looking into the sea at night. I froze. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. We locked eyes, this thing and I, and the strangest feeling washed over me. It was like being hit with a wave of pure emotion. Not fear, though I was terrified, but profound sadness. The kind of grief that hollows you out from the inside. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Though I had no reason to cry, the creature didn't move, not a muscle, not even to blink. It just watched me with those impossible eyes, completely still, despite the snow falling on its dark fur. "Hey!" I shouted, waving my arms, trying to scare it off like you're supposed to do with wild animals. "Get out of here!" Nothing, no reaction whatsoever. It just kept staring, and I kept feeling that awful sadness seeping into me like cold water. I don't know how long we stood there, locked in that bizarre standoff. It could have been minutes or an hour. Time felt warped, stretched out. I remember thinking, this isn't real, I'm hallucinating from the cold. But I wasn't cold anymore. Despite the snow, despite the freezing temperature, I felt nothing but that overwhelming grief. Then something in me snapped. I couldn't take those eyes anymore. I turned away, breaking eye contact, and started shouting Dana's name over and over, my voice growing hoarse. I was practically screaming, more from desperation to escape whatever was happening than actual hope she'd hear me. And then, like an answer to a prayer, I saw a flashlight beam cutting through the trees. "Tyler, is that you?" Dana's voice. I've never been so relieved to hear anything in my life. "I'm here," I called back, my voice cracking. "Over here." When she reached me, she looked worried but not panicked. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Didn't you hear me calling?" I hadn't heard anything except that wailing sound and my own shouts. I glanced back at the rock where the creature had been, but it was gone. No sign it had ever been there at all. "Sorry," I mumbled. I got turned around in the snow. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. How could I? Hey, I just had a staring contest with some giant wolf thing that made me feel like my soul was being sucked out. Isn't exactly casual conversation. She'd think I was losing my mind. Hell, I thought I might be losing my mind. We made it back to camp without incident. It wasn't even that far, maybe a quarter mile. In daylight, I would have found it easily. Dana kept asking if I was okay, saying I looked pale, shaken. I blamed it on the cold and the scare of getting lost. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside our tent made me tense up. I kept seeing those eyes when I closed mine. Deep, searching, ancient somehow. The feeling of sadness lingered like an aftertaste. In the morning, I went back to look for tracks while Dana was packing up. I told her I was retrieving the firewood I'd dropped. The rock was easy enough to find, but there were no paw prints, no sign anything had been there, just unmarked snow. It didn't make sense. Something that size should have left deep impressions, even in fresh snow. We left camp earlier than planned. I made up some excuse about the weather turning, but really, I couldn't stand being there another minute. The forest that had seemed so beautiful the day before now felt oppressive, watching. The whole drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those eyes following us. It's been 3 months now, and I still can't shake what happened. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, overcome with that same inexplicable sadness. Sometimes I dream of those eyes searching through me like I'm made of glass. I've researched local wildlife, cryptids, even indigenous legends from the area. Nothing matches what I saw. The closest I've come is stories about skinwalkers or wendigos, but even those don't quite fit. I know what you're thinking. I was lost, scared, my mind playing tricks on me. Pareidolia, seeing patterns where there are none. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe the stress and the darkness and the isolation combined to create a hallucination. But I can't forget how it felt when our eyes met. Like it knew me. Like it was taking inventory of everything I am, everything I've done, everything I might become. Like a piece of me got taken in that moment. For those few minutes I wasn't on Earth anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere older, somewhere outside of normal reality. And whatever that creature was, it belonged there, not here. I haven't been camping since. Dana keeps asking when we're planning our next trip, but I always find a reason to put it off. How do I tell her that I'm afraid of the dark now? Afraid of what might be watching from just beyond the firelight? I don't expect anyone to believe me. I'm not sure I would believe it if someone else told me this story, but it happened, and I can't explain it. All I know is that something found me in those woods, something impossible. And sometimes I can't shake the feeling that it's still watching, waiting for me to wander off alone again. Story 5. I know this is going to sound completely insane, but I need to write this down somewhere. I've tried talking to therapists, my parents, even my roommate, but everyone just gives me that look, the one that says, "Poor Emma is losing her mind." I'm not. I know I'm not. But what's happening to me? I can't explain it, and it's getting worse. It started about 10 months ago. I was living a normal life in Riverdale, working at the local library, hanging out with friends on weekends, binging Netflix shows like everyone else. Nothing special, but it was my life, and I was content. Then the dreams began. At first, I thought they were just unusually vivid dreams. You know how sometimes you have a dream that feels so real you're disoriented when you wake up? It was like that, but 100 times more intense. In these dreams, I'm not just watching myself live another life. I am living it. I feel the sun on my skin, taste food, smell flowers, experience pain, everything. Last night was the worst episode yet, and I'm still shaking as I type this. I went to bed around 11 after watching some mindless cooking show. Nothing unusual, nothing that would trigger anything weird. I remember pulling my comforter up because the AC was blasting. My roommate always keeps it too cold, and I drifted off while scrolling through my phone. Then suddenly I wasn't in my bed anymore. I was standing in front of a building I've never seen in my waking life, yet I knew exactly what it was. It was my workplace, a research facility where I've apparently worked for years. I even knew my employee ID number, 4587623, without having to think about it. I knew which floor my lab was on, 3rd, which parking spot was mine, E14, and even the security guard's name, Marcus. Here's the thing that freaks me out the most. I'm not making these details up as I'm writing this. They're burned into my brain as clearly as my actual phone number or address in this world. I remember them as facts, not as dream fragments. In last night's dream, I walked into the building and felt immediate dread. Something was wrong. The lobby was empty, which was unusual for that time of day. I somehow knew it was Tuesday morning, around 9:30. The lights were flickering, and there was a smell like ozone in the air. I took the elevator up to my lab, and when I stepped out, the hallway was completely silent. No voices, no equipment humming, nothing. Just dead silence. My heart was pounding as I swiped my keycard, which had a small coffee stain in the top right corner, again, a detail I just knew, and entered the lab. Inside, all my colleagues were frozen in place, like mannequins. Dr. Levine was mid-gesture, pointing at something on a whiteboard. Sarah was reaching for a sample tray. Miguel was typing on his computer. None of them were moving or breathing. I called out, touched Sarah's arm, even shouted, but nothing happened. Then I noticed the window. Outside, the sky wasn't blue. It was a deep, swirling purple with what looked like cracks running through it, like broken glass. And through those cracks, I could see something else. Another world, maybe. Just darkness and shapes I couldn't make out. I felt panic rising, that familiar feeling of, I need to wake up now. But I couldn't. I never can when these episodes happen. I'm trapped until whatever forces control this nightmare decide to release me. I ran to the elevator, desperate to get out of the building. When the doors opened, instead of the lobby, I was in my childhood home. Except it wasn't actually my real childhood home from this reality. It was the home I grew up in within this other world. A place I've never physically been in my waking life, but that I remembered perfectly. I knew where every piece of furniture was placed. I knew which stair creaked, the third from the top. I knew my bedroom was the second door on the right, with a poster of some band called Ethereal Shift on the door, a band that doesn't exist here but that I somehow knew was my favorite when I was 16 in that world. Inside my room there was a journal on the desk. I opened it and saw my handwriting, but the entries were about a life I've never lived. There were mentions of friends I've never met, classes I've never taken, and events I've never experienced. But reading it felt like reading my own memories. Then I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, heavy, slow footsteps that didn't sound human. The third stair creaked, and I froze. Whatever was coming up those stairs wasn't something I wanted to meet. I slammed the bedroom door shut and tried to lock it, but the lock was broken. I suddenly remembered I'd been meaning to fix it for weeks. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Then silence. I pressed my ear against the door, holding my breath. Nothing. Then a scratch at the door, not like fingernails, but like claws or something metallic. "Emma," a voice whispered from the other side. It wasn't anyone I recognized, but it knew my name. "Emma, you don't belong there. You belong here, with us." I backed away from the door, looking desperately around the room for a weapon or escape route. The window was too small, and we were on the second floor anyway. There was nothing I could use to defend myself except a desk lamp. The door handle started to turn, slowly. I grabbed the lamp, yanking the cord from the wall. "You can't keep jumping between worlds," the voice said, louder now. "It's tearing holes in the fabric. Soon there won't be a way back." The door began to open and I raised the lamp, ready to swing. But before I could see what was on the other side, something hit me hard on the back of the head. Pain exploded through my skull and everything went black. Then I woke up in my bed, gasping and covered in sweat. My roommate was standing in the doorway, looking concerned. "You were screaming," she said. "Are you okay?" I wasn't okay. My head was throbbing with pain exactly where I'd been hit in the dream. I reached back and felt a tender spot, wincing. How is that possible? How can I feel physical pain from something that happened in a dream? This has happened before. Once I dreamed I cut my hand on broken glass, and when I woke up, there was a thin red line across my palm that stung for days. Another time I dreamed I fell downstairs and woke up with bruises on my legs that I couldn't explain. The physical marks terrify me, but what scares me even more is how real that other life feels. I have memories of growing up there, birthday parties, school dances, my first kiss with a boy named Elliot behind the gym during sophomore year. I remember my parents in that world, They looked like my actual parents, but with subtle differences. My dad has a scar above his right eyebrow that he got from a fishing accident when I was 7. My mom wears her hair differently and speaks with a slight accent I can't place. These aren't random dream details. They're consistent every time. I've started keeping a journal of these experiences, trying to make sense of them. There are patterns emerging. The dreams are getting longer each time. The first few lasted what felt like minutes or hours. Last night's felt like an entire day. I'm terrified that eventually I'll get stuck there, unable to return to this reality. And here's another thing that's messing with my head. I'm starting to feel like that world is the real one, and this one, the one where I'm typing this right now, is the dream. When I'm there, everything feels more vivid, more solid somehow. Colors are brighter, sensations are stronger. It's like the difference between watching a movie in standard definition versus IMAX 3D. I've stopped making plans with friends. I've called in sick to work so many times I'm afraid I'll get fired. What's the point of investing in this life if it's not even real, or if I might suddenly disappear from it? I feel like I'm just going through the motions here, waiting to return to the other place, even though that terrifies me too. My therapist thinks I'm experiencing some form of dissociation, or that I have an overactive imagination. She's prescribed medication that just makes me feel foggy. My parents think I'm stressed from work, or that I'm not getting enough sleep. Nobody believes that what's happening to me is real, but it is real. The bruises are real. The pain is real. The memories are real. Last night's warning keeps echoing in my head. You can't keep jumping between worlds. It's tearing holes in the fabric. Soon there won't be a way back. What if whatever is happening is actually dangerous, not just to my mental health, but to something bigger? What if I'm actually traveling between parallel realities somehow, and it's causing damage to both worlds? I don't know what to do. I'm afraid to go to sleep tonight. I've made coffee and plan to stay awake as long as possible, but eventually exhaustion will win. It always does. And then, where will I end up? Will I come back this time? If anyone reading this has experienced anything similar or has any insight, please let me know. I feel completely alone in this, and I'm running out of time and options. I can feel that other world pulling at me even when I'm awake now, like gravity from another dimension. The headache from where I was hit last night hasn't faded. In fact, it's getting worse, and I've started seeing things in the corner of my eye. Flashes of purple sky, cracks in the air that disappear when I look directly at them. I think whatever boundary exists between these worlds is getting thinner, and I'm terrified of what happens when it finally breaks. Story 6. I've never really told this story outside my immediate family, but it's been 3 years and I still can't explain what happened. I guess writing it down might help me process it, or maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I moved into my apartment in downtown Fresno about 4 years ago. It's this really cool old building from the 1920s that used to be a hardware store. My family owns the business that operates on the first floor now, a small print shop. And the second floor was converted into 2 living spaces, my grandmother's art studio on one side and my apartment on the other. I was 23 when all this happened and super excited to have my own place, even if it was literally above the family business. The apartment had character, high ceilings, those old wooden floors that creak when you walk on them, and these amazing tall windows that let in tons of natural light. It was perfect for a first apartment, especially since I got it rent-free in exchange for helping out in the shop occasionally. My little sister Madison would visit me pretty often. She was 17 at the time and thought my place was way cooler than our parents' suburban house. She also worked part-time at the shop after school, so she'd sometimes hang out upstairs with me before heading home. I noticed weird stuff almost immediately after moving in. At first, I tried to rationalize everything. Old buildings make noise, right? But these weren't just random creaks and groans. I'd hear what sounded exactly like footsteps downstairs at night, long after the shop had closed. Sometimes it sounded like someone was dragging something heavy across the floor. I'd call down, thinking maybe Dad had come back to finish something, but no one was ever there. I checked the security system logs. Nothing. No one had entered or exited the building. Then there was the clock. The previous tenant had left this ancient wooden cuckoo clock on the wall. It was broken, the pendulum didn't swing, and it had no batteries. I kept it as decoration because it matched the vintage vibe of the place. But around 3 in the morning, almost every night, I'd hear it chime. Not the full cuckoo sound, just a single hollow bong that would wake me up instantly. When I'd check, the clock hands never moved, and everything looked exactly the same. I didn't tell anyone at first because I didn't want to seem crazy or have my parents think I was making up stories to move back home. But eventually, I mentioned it to Madison, who thought it was totally creepy but also kind of awesome that I might have a ghost. The worst part wasn't the noises, though. It was the constant feeling of being watched. I'd be cooking dinner or watching TV and suddenly get this overwhelming sensation that someone was standing right behind me. I'd spin around, heart pounding, but no one was there, every single time. This went on for months. I started leaving lights on at night and playing music or keeping the TV on for background noise, anything to make the place feel less empty, even though I knew I wasn't alone. Then came that Saturday in October. Madison had come over to hang out. We were making nachos and watching this stupid reality show when this smell hit us. It was absolutely foul, like something had died and been rotting for weeks. We both noticed it at the exact same time. Oh my God, what is that? Madison covered her nose with her sleeve. My first thought was that something had died in the walls. Maybe a rat or a bird had gotten trapped. The building was old enough that it wouldn't be surprising. We checked the trash can, but it had just been emptied that morning. The fridge was clean. The sink disposal hadn't been used in days. The smell seemed to be coming from the corner of the kitchen, where I had this narrow closet that I used for storing recycling and some cleaning supplies. It wasn't even a proper closet, more like a space between the wall and the chimney that someone had put a door on. Inside it was unfinished, with exposed brick from the chimney on one side and rough wooden planks on the other. "It's definitely coming from in there," Madison said, pointing at the closet. I approached it slowly, dreading what we might find. When I opened the door, the smell got stronger, but there was nothing obvious, just my recycling bin and some paper bags. The space was so narrow that you had to turn sideways to get inside. That's when I saw it. There was something on the back wall that I'd never noticed before, something that absolutely, positively had not been there the day before when I'd tossed in an empty cereal box. It looked like a piece of paper tacked to the wooden plank. It was in the far corner, partially hidden by shadow. "What's that?" Madison asked, peering over my shoulder. "I don't know." I felt a chill run through me. It wasn't there yesterday. I tried to reach it, but the closet was too narrow and too deep for me to get all the way to the back wall comfortably. Plus, something about that paper made me not want to touch it. "I can get it," Madison offered. Before I could stop her, she squeezed past me into the closet, reached up and yanked the paper off the wall. She darted back out like she was afraid something might grab her. We took the paper to the kitchen table. It was about the size of a book page, yellowed with age, and so brittle it felt like it might crumble in our hands. And drawn on it, in purple crayon, was a simple smiley face. Just 2 dots for eyes and a curved line for a mouth. Nothing special or artistic about it. It looked like a young child had drawn it. "Happy Smiley," Madison said, giving it a name immediately. That name stuck. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. This paper was old. Really old. The edges were frayed. The color had faded to that deep yellow that paper turns after decades, and it felt fragile, like it would disintegrate if we handled it too roughly. This wasn't something someone had drawn recently. This thing was ancient. "Liv, where did this come from?" Madison asked, her voice quiet. "This has been in your apartment the whole time?" "No," I said firmly. "No way. I've cleaned that closet. I've been in there 100 times. This was not there before today." We both stared at the smiley face. It was such a simple drawing, but something about it felt wrong. The purple crayon was pressed so hard in places that it had nearly torn through the paper, and the smile seemed off, too wide, too knowing. The weirdest part, as soon as we removed the paper from the closet, the smell disappeared. Not gradually, it was just gone, as if someone had flipped a switch. 1 minute the apartment reeked of decay, and the next, nothing. "Okay, this is freaking me out," I admitted. "No one has been in my apartment. The building was locked. The alarm was set. There's no way someone came in here and put this in my closet." Madison was examining the paper carefully. Maybe it was already there, like hidden behind something and it fell down. But I knew that wasn't possible. I'd emptied and wiped down that closet just a week earlier when I spilled cleaning solution. There had been nothing on those walls. We debated what to do with it. Throw it away, put it back. In the end, we decided to take it to our grandparents' house the next day. Our grandmother had lived in Fresno her whole life and knew the history of a lot of the downtown buildings. Maybe she'd have some insight. That night, after Madison went home, I barely slept. The apartment felt different somehow. The usual nighttime noises were absent. No footsteps, no clock chime, nothing, just silence. But the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. The next day, we showed the paper to our grandmother. Her reaction was not what we expected. She took one look at it, and her face went pale. Without saying a word, she walked straight to the wood stove in their living room, opened it, and threw the paper in. It caught fire instantly, curling and blackening in seconds. "Grandma!" Madison cried. "What are you doing?" "Some things are better not questioned," was all she said. Our grandmother was deeply religious, and I could tell from her expression that she thought the paper was somehow evil, dangerous. She wouldn't explain further, just made us promise not to bring anything else from the apartment to her house. On the drive back, Madison and I were quiet. "Do you think we made it angry?" she finally asked. "By taking its picture?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to admit that I'd had the exact same thought, whatever it was. The next few weeks were tense. I kept expecting something to escalate, for the noises to get louder, for things to move around, for something to appear in my closet again. But nothing happened. The footsteps downstairs returned to their regular pattern. The clock chimed at 3 a.m. as usual. The feeling of being watched remained. Madison experienced things too, especially when she worked in the shop alone. She'd call me, voice shaking, saying she could hear someone walking around upstairs in my apartment when I wasn't home. Once, she heard what sounded like glass shattering above her, a sound so loud and distinct that she called our dad to come check if someone had broken in. When they went upstairs, everything was exactly as I'd left it. No broken glass, no sign of disturbance. I still live in that apartment. The activity has never escalated beyond what I've described. Sometimes I wonder if removing that paper, that happy smiley, was some kind of test, like whatever is in the building wanted to see what we do. I've researched the building's history, trying to find any clues about who might have drawn that face or why it was hidden in my closet. The building has had many occupants over the past century. The hardware store, a tailor shop in the 40s, offices in the 70s. No record of any deaths or tragedies that might explain a haunting, but I know what I experienced. That paper appeared out of nowhere in a locked apartment. It was decades old, but hidden in a spot I check regularly. It brought with it the smell of death, and when we removed it, the smell vanished instantly. Sometimes I think about going to my grandmother and asking what she knew, why she reacted so strongly, but part of me doesn't want to know. Part of me thinks some doors are better left closed. All I know is that I'm not alone in this apartment, and I never have been. Whatever or whoever is here seems content to just exist alongside me, making noise, watching, occasionally making its presence known in small ways. And sometimes, late at night, I think I can hear the faint sound of crayons scratching on paper coming from somewhere inside the walls. Story 7. I still can't sleep properly, even though it's been almost 35 years since I first saw it. Writing this down feels like I'm inviting it back somehow, but I need to get this off my chest. This all started back in '83 when I was 15. I grew up in a quiet suburb just outside Manchester. Nothing special about the place. Rows of brick houses, corner shops, and a small playground where we'd hang out most evenings. The playground sat at the bottom of this small hill with an old walking path running along the top. The path used to be railroad tracks before they were removed in the 70s. From where we usually sat, you could see pretty much the entire path, except for a small section that was blocked by this skinny old tree that somehow survived when they cleared the area. That evening in October, it was getting dark earlier, around 6:30. Me, Johnny, Pete and Mark were sitting on the swings, smoking cigarettes we'd nicked from Johnny's dad. It was that time when the streetlights had just come on, but there was still enough daylight to see clearly. I was facing the hill while the others had their backs to it. I looked down for maybe 10 seconds to light my cigarette. When I looked back up, that's when I saw it. Standing on the path was this figure. I say figure because calling it a person doesn't feel right. It was abnormally tall, like freakishly tall, at least 7 feet, maybe more, and it was completely black. Not like a person wearing black clothes, but like a silhouette cut out of reality. It was pitch black, with no features I could make out except its shape. The shape was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned fedora hat and a long trench coat that went down to its knees. One of its arms seemed to be holding something, what looked like a briefcase. I remember thinking how weird it was that I could make out these details even though it was completely black, like my brain was filling in the information somehow. I was about to point it out to the others when the thing started to move. But it didn't walk. It ran, and not normal running. It moved so fast it was almost a blur, completely silent, no footsteps, nothing. It sprinted along the path towards the tree. My heart was racing, watching this thing move in a way nothing human could. Then it passed behind that skinny tree and it vanished, just disappeared. The tree wasn't nearly wide enough to hide anyone, especially not someone that tall. It should have appeared on the other side within a split second, but there was nothing. I jumped up, dropping my cigarette. "Did you see that?" I shouted, pointing at the path. The others looked at me like I was mental. "See what?" Pete asked. I told them what I'd seen and they all laughed, thinking I was trying to scare them. Johnny even walked up the hill to check behind the tree, making a big show of looking around. "No boogeyman here, Danny boy," he called down. But I knew what I'd seen. I went up there myself, searched the whole area. There was nowhere anyone could have hidden. No way someone could have run off without being seen. The hill was open on all sides. If they'd continued in any direction, I would have spotted them. For months afterward, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination or some weird trick of the light, but I knew deep down it wasn't. Whatever I'd seen wasn't natural. I mostly kept it to myself after that first night. The others had already taken the piss enough, and I didn't need the reputation as the local nutter. But about a year later, I finally told my best mate Victor about it. We were in his bedroom listening to Iron Maiden records and talking about the usual teenage stuff. Girls, music, how much we hated school. I don't know why, but something made me bring it up. "Vic, do you believe in like ghosts or weird shit like that?" He shrugged. "Dunno. Maybe." "Why?" So I started telling him about what happened. I got to the part about the figure being tall and pitch black, wearing what looked like a fedora, and before I could continue, Victor's face went completely white. He sat up suddenly. "And a trench coat," he said, finishing my description. My blood ran cold. I hadn't mentioned the trench coat yet. "How did you know that?" I asked, my mouth dry. Victor looked like he might be sick. He got up and closed his bedroom door, even though his parents weren't home. "I saw it too," he whispered. "Last summer, before we started hanging out." He told me how he'd been walking home alone one night around 11. He took a shortcut through the park when these stray dogs started chasing him. He stopped and crouched down to pick up a rock to scare them off. When he stood back up and turned around, there was this extremely tall figure standing right in front of him. Just like what I'd seen, it was completely black, featureless, except for these glowing red eyes that Victor said looked like cigarette embers but brighter. It was wearing a fedora hat and a long trench coat, and it was holding what looked like a briefcase. Victor said he nearly shat himself. He dropped the rock and ran all the way home, not looking back once. When he got home, he was so terrified that he told his mum everything, which wasn't like Vic at all. He usually kept everything to himself. The really strange part was his mum's reaction. Instead of dismissing it, she went very quiet and called his aunt, who came over the next day. His aunt told him she'd seen the exact same thing 20 years earlier when she was picking mushrooms in the woods during daylight. In her encounter, though, the shadow figure was holding what looked like an old-style telephone instead of a briefcase. Finding out Victor had seen the same thing shook me to my core. We'd both independently seen this thing, and his aunt had too, decades earlier. This wasn't just in our heads. After that, we started hearing other stories, never directly, always a friend of a friend, but always describing the same tall shadow figure with a hat and coat. Some said it just watched them, others claimed it followed them before disappearing. I told my grandmother about it once when she visited from Pakistan. She got very serious and said it sounded like a jinn, a kind of supernatural entity in Islamic belief. She warned me not to talk about it too much, saying that acknowledging these beings can attract their attention. I wish I'd listened to her. About 3 years after my first sighting, the nightmares started, always the same dream. I'd be standing in complete darkness, unable to see anything around me. Then I'd feel something watching me. I'd turn around, and there it would be, the shadow man standing motionless. In the dreams, I could never move or scream. I'd just stand there as it slowly approached me. The worst part was what happened next. As it got closer, I'd feel this intense heat, like my skin was burning. I'd look down and see flames engulfing my body, but I still couldn't move or scream. I'd just burn while the shadow watched. Then I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. These nightmares came regularly for about 6 months, then gradually stopped. I thought maybe it was finally over. I moved away from Manchester for university, then got a job in London. Victor stayed up north, but we kept in touch, meeting up a few times a year. We rarely talked about the shadow man anymore. It had become this unspoken thing between us, like if we didn't mention it, maybe it would stay away. Then, last month, Victor called me at 3 in the morning. I knew something was wrong the second I heard his voice. "Dan," he said, his voice trembling. "It's back. I just saw it." Victor had been coming home from a late shift at the hospital where he works. He'd just parked his car and was walking to his front door when he felt like someone was watching him. He turned and saw it standing under a streetlight about 20 meters away. The same tall, black figure with the fedora and coat. But Victor said something was different this time. It wasn't completely black anymore. He could make out what looked like a white coat over its black form. "Like doctors wear," he said. The worst part was what happened next. As Victor stood frozen in fear, the thing took a single step toward him. Just one step, but it was enough. Victor ran inside and locked every door and window in his house. He said he sat up all night with the lights on, terrified it might somehow get in. I drove up to Manchester the next day to see him. He looked awful, like he hadn't slept in days. His wife told me he'd been checking the locks constantly and wouldn't go outside after dark. I stayed with them for a few days, but nothing happened. No sign of the shadow man. Before I left, Victor made me promise I'd come back if he called again. I could see the fear in his eyes. That was 3 weeks ago. Victor hasn't called again, which I hope means everything's okay. But I can't shake this feeling that it's not over. The shadow man has been in our lives for over 3 decades now, appearing and disappearing without explanation. I still don't know what it is. A ghost? A jinn like my grandmother suggested? Some kind of interdimensional being? All I know is that it's real, and it's been watching us for years. The thing that scares me the most is how it seems to be changing. That white coat Victor described. Why the change after all these years? And why did it take a step toward him when it had always just observed before? I can't help feeling like it's building up to something, like all these appearances over the years have been leading to some kind of I don't know what. I just know I'm terrified of getting a call from Victor in the middle of the night again. Or worse, seeing that tall, dark figure standing outside my own window, wearing that white coat, taking another step closer. I've never told this story publicly before. Part of me is afraid that writing it down might somehow summon it again, but I needed to share this with someone. If you've seen something similar, please let me know. I need to understand what this thing is and why it's been haunting us for so long. I just hope writing this doesn't make it come back. Story 8. I've been holding this in for almost 20 years now, and I guess it's time to finally talk about it. I don't care if you believe me or not. I just need to get this off my chest before I lose my mind completely. This happened back in 2005 when I was 14, living in Cairns, Queensland. If you're not familiar with Australia, Cairns is tropical, hot, humid, and surrounded by rainforest. I lived there with my parents in a decent neighborhood. Nothing special, but not bad either. My best mates were Jake and Matt. We'd been friends since primary school and spent most of our free time together riding bikes, playing video games, or just getting into the kind of harmless trouble teenage boys find. We weren't bad kids, just curious and easily bored. Everyone in town knew about the Barrett house. It sat on the edge of our neighborhood, backing up to a stretch of sugarcane fields. The house had been abandoned since 1998 when the Barrett family disappeared. And I mean literally disappeared. Mom, Dad, and their 2 kids, a boy and girl around 10 and 8. The story went that neighbors called the police after not seeing the family for several days. When the cops showed up, they found half-eaten meals on the dinner table, the TV still on, and cars in the garage. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing taken. They just vanished. The only thing out of place was some weird scratching on the kids' bedroom floor that supposedly said, "We heard the whistle. It's coming." Of course, this became the ultimate ghost story in our town. Every kid had a version of what happened to the Barretts, each more ridiculous than the last. Some said they were abducted by aliens. Others claimed they were murdered by a distant relative. The most popular theory was that they'd gone into witness protection after seeing a crime. The house had stood empty ever since. The property was tied up in some legal battle between relatives, so it just sat there, slowly being reclaimed by the tropical climate. Vines crawled up the sides, the paint peeled in the humid air, and the yard grew wild. Jake was obsessed with the place. His older brother claimed to have snuck in once and heard children laughing in empty rooms. I thought it was bullshit, but Jake believed every word. For months, he'd been trying to convince Matt and me to break in and check it out. I finally gave in one Friday night in July, winter in Australia, but still warm in Cairns. My parents thought I was sleeping over at Jake's, and his parents thought we were having a video game marathon, which wasn't entirely untrue. We did play games until about 11, then grabbed our backpacks with flashlights, a camera, and snacks. Priorities, right? It was a 20-minute walk to the Barrett house. The streets were quiet, just the occasional car passing. The closer we got, the more my stomach knotted up. I wasn't scared of ghosts. I didn't believe in that stuff. But breaking and entering was definitely illegal. "We're just looking around," Jake insisted when I voiced my concerns. "Nobody's checked on this place in years." The Barrett house looked exactly like you'd expect an abandoned house to look. 2 stories, weatherboard exterior gone gray with age, a sagging front porch, and windows either boarded up or broken. The yard was overgrown with waist-high grass and flowering weeds. A rusty swing set sat in the side yard, looking lonely and forgotten. We didn't dare try the front door, too visible from the street. Instead, we circled around back where the property backed up against the sugarcane fields. The cane was tall, over 6 feet, creating a wall of green that rustled in the night breeze. "There," Matt whispered, pointing to a window at the back of the house. The glass was broken, and the board that had once covered it had partially fallen away. Jake went first, pulling away the loose board and shining his flashlight inside. "It's the kitchen," he reported. "Looks clear." One by one, we climbed through, careful of the broken glass. I was last, and as I stepped into the kitchen, I noticed something odd right away. The air felt thick, heavy somehow, like the pressure before a storm, and there was a smell. Not the musty, moldy smell you'd expect in an abandoned house, but something like rain on hot pavement, even though it hadn't rained in weeks. The kitchen was exactly as the stories described. Plates with rotted food still sat on the table, though most had been knocked over by animals or insects. Cupboard doors hung open, and everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. "This is creepy as hell," Matt whispered, his voice too loud in the silent house. "Look," Jake pointed his flashlight at the refrigerator. There were children's drawings held by magnets, faded but still visible. Happy family pictures, mom, dad, and 2 kids, standing in front of a crude house drawing, normal kid stuff. We moved into the living room next, old 90s furniture, a TV that looked ancient by today's standards, family photos on the walls. It looked like the family had just stepped out for a minute and never returned. "I want to see the kids' room," Jake said. "Where they found that message." I didn't want to go upstairs. Something about the house felt wrong. The air pressure continued to build, making my ears pop, and despite the stuffiness, I felt cold. "Come on," Matt nudged me. We came all this way. The stairs creaked horribly as we climbed them. Each step felt like it might give way under our weight. Upstairs, there were 4 doors, presumably the parents' bedroom, 2 kids' rooms, and a bathroom. Jake tried the first door. It was the bathroom, untouched except for a shattered mirror. The second door revealed the master bedroom, clothes still in the open closet, bed unmade. The third door was the girls' room, pink walls, stuffed animals, a small bed with a princess canopy. The room looked normal, except for one thing. All the toys were arranged in a perfect circle in the center of the room. "Animals must have knocked them around," Jake suggested, but his voice wavered. "Animals don't arrange toys in circles, idiot," Matt replied. The final room was the boys' room. Blue walls, dinosaur posters, toy cars scattered around, and there, in the middle of the wooden floor, were deep scratches forming words. We heard the whistle. "It's coming!" Holy shit, I breathed. So that part of the story was true. Jake took photos with his digital camera while I stared at the message. The scratches looked like they'd been made with something sharp, dug deeply into the wood with force. Then Matt, who had wandered over to the window, suddenly called out, "Guys, come look at this!" We joined him at the window, which overlooked the backyard and the sugarcane fields beyond. Matt pointed, and at first, I didn't see anything unusual. "What am I looking at?" Jake asked. "The tracks," Matt said. "Those train tracks. They weren't there before." I squinted, and then I saw them, train tracks cutting through the sugarcane field, leading directly to the back of the house. They seemed to stop right at the wall of the house. "That's not possible," I said. "There's no train line here. Never has been." "Well, those are definitely train tracks," Matt insisted. We went back downstairs and out through the kitchen window into the backyard. The night air felt cool against my skin after the stuffiness of the house. We walked toward where we'd seen the tracks from the window, and there they were. Actual train tracks, old-fashioned ones with wooden ties, cutting through the cane field and running straight to the back of the house. They literally ended at the wall, as if the house had been built over them. "This makes no sense," I said, kneeling to touch the metal rails. They felt cold and very real under my fingers. Matt walked a few steps along the tracks into the cane field. "Maybe it's an old sugarcane railway. They used to use small trains to transport cane." "Why would it go straight into a house?" Jake asked, taking photos. That's when we heard it. A sound so faint at first that I thought I was imagining it. A distant whistle, like an old steam train, echoing through the night air. Matt froze mid-step on the tracks. "Did you hear that?" We all went silent, listening. The whistle came again, louder this time. It sounded like it was coming from deep within the cane fields, but getting closer. "It's probably just a train on the main line," Jake said, but his voice shook. The main railway was kilometers away. No way we could hear it this clearly. The whistle sounded again, even closer now, followed by what sounded like the chuffing of an engine and the clatter of wheels on tracks. "Guys," Matt said, backing away from the tracks, "I think we should go." The whistle blew once more, so loud it hurt my ears. It had to be close, very close. But we couldn't see any lights in the cane field, no sign of an actual train. That's when the wind picked up, the cane stalks swaying violently, as if being pushed aside by something massive moving through them. The tracks beneath our feet began to vibrate. "Run!" I screamed. We bolted toward the house, but Matt tripped on one of the rails and fell hard. Jake and I grabbed his arms, hauling him up as the vibration beneath our feet intensified. The whistle blew again, right on top of us now, and there was a tremendous rushing noise like a massive object displacing air. We scrambled through the kitchen window, cutting ourselves on the broken glass in our panic. We didn't stop running until we were out the front door and halfway down the street. Only then did we pause, gasping for breath, to look back at the house. It stood silent and dark against the night sky. No train, no whistle, nothing unusual at all. "What the actual fuck was that?" Matt panted, examining a cut on his palm from the glass. None of us had an answer. We walked home in stunned silence, occasionally looking over our shoulders, half expecting to see something following us. The next morning, we convinced ourselves we'd just freaked ourselves out. Ghost stories and an abandoned house had played tricks on our minds, but we had to be sure, so we rode our bikes back to the Barrett house in broad daylight. The house looked the same as it had the night before, but when we went around back to look for the train tracks, they were gone. The yard backed up directly to the cane field with no tracks, no indication they had ever been there. "But we all saw them," Matt insisted. "They were right here." Jake scrolled through his camera, showing us the photos he'd taken inside the house, the scratched message, the girls' toys in a circle, the kitchen with its abandoned dishes. But when he got to where the photos of the train tracks should have been, they weren't there, just blurry images of the backyard and cane field. I became obsessed with the Barrett house after that. In the years that followed, I researched everything I could about the property. I discovered it had originally belonged to a man named William Kiernan, a reclusive sugarcane farmer who disappeared in 1987, more than a decade before the Barretts vanished. In an old newspaper article about Kiernan's disappearance, his neighbor was quoted saying that Kiernan always used to say cryptic things like, "It ain't mine to leave, the train still runs, you just have to listen." The property had sat empty for years after Kiernan vanished, until the Barretts bought it in 1996. 2 years later, they disappeared too. I've never told this story publicly before. Jake and Matt and I drifted apart after high school, as friends often do. Last I heard, Matt moved to Perth and Jake joined the army. I still live in Queensland, though not in Cairns anymore. Sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm half asleep, I think I hear a distant whistle, like an old steam train. It jolts me awake every time, heart pounding, body covered in cold sweat. The Barrett house was finally demolished 5 years ago to make way for new development. I wonder if the construction workers found anything unusual, like old train tracks buried beneath the foundation. I wonder if they hear whistles in the night. I still don't know what happened to the Barrett family or to William Kiernan before them, but I know what I saw and heard that night. And sometimes I catch myself listening for that whistle, wondering if one day the train might come for me too. Story 9. I'm 28 now, but even typing this out is making my eyes water for reasons I still can't explain. This happened when I was 9, and I've only told a handful of people because it sounds so made up, but I swear on everything I love that this was real. We just moved into this older house in the suburbs. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, the usual. My room was the smallest, painted light blue with dinosaur stickers on the walls from the previous owner's kid. My parents got me this wooden bunk bed even though I didn't have siblings. I think they were hoping I'd have friends over for sleepovers, but I was pretty shy back then. The weird thing about my room was this massive built-in closet with mirrored sliding doors that took up almost an entire wall. I remember thinking it was cool at first because I could see myself jumping on the bed or playing with my toys from across the room. It started on a Tuesday night in October. I remember it was October because we had those paper Halloween decorations stuck to the windows, and my costume was hanging on my closet doorknob. I was going to be a ninja that year. I woke up around 3 in the morning, not with a jolt or because of a noise. I just opened my eyes, totally calm. And there she was, standing at the foot of my bunk bed was a woman. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring into the mirror. I could only see her from behind. This long white dress that pooled slightly on the floor around her feet. It looked like a wedding dress, but not one of those puffy princess ones. This was simpler, flowing straight down. Her hair was dark, maybe black or brown, and it hung down her back. Here's the strangest part. I wasn't scared, not even a little bit. I just watched her for maybe a minute, wondering if she'd turn around, but she never did. She just kept staring at her reflection. Then I fell back asleep like it was nothing. The next morning, I figured it was just a weird dream. I didn't even think about mentioning it to my parents. But the next night, I woke up again. Same time, same woman, same position at the foot of my bed, staring into the mirror. This time, I actually pinched my arm hard enough to leave a mark because I needed to know if I was dreaming. It hurt, and I was definitely awake. The woman didn't react to my movement at all. She just stood there, completely still. I couldn't make out her face in the mirror. It was too dark, and she was just a silhouette against the dim nightlight glow from my hallway. I remember thinking, I should be terrified right now, but I wasn't. Instead, I just pulled my blanket up to my chin and fell back asleep while she was still standing there. This happened every single night for a week. I'd wake up, always around 3, and she'd be there in her white dress, staring into the mirror. Sometimes I'd watch her for a few minutes. Sometimes I'd just go right back to sleep. I never tried to talk to her. I don't know why. After a week, I finally told my mom over breakfast. I said, "Mom, there's a lady in a white dress who stands in my room at night and looks in my mirror." I can still picture her face. She froze with her coffee mug halfway to her mouth, then set it down carefully. "Sweetie, that's probably just your dad playing a joke with his work projector," she said, but her voice sounded different, tighter. "He's got that fancy one that can make images look real." It made sense. My dad worked in advertising and sometimes brought home equipment. I believed her, and I felt relieved. That night at dinner, I asked my dad to stop projecting the lady in my room because it was getting old. He looked confused and said he didn't know what I was talking about, but my mom jumped in and said, "The joke's over, honey. You scared her enough." My dad still seemed confused, but he just shrugged and went back to eating. My mom told me, "If she appears again, just call for me, okay? I'll come right away." That night, she appeared again. But even though my mom had told me to call for her, something stopped me. I physically couldn't make myself yell or even whisper for my mom. It wasn't like something was holding my mouth shut. I just didn't want to. I wasn't afraid of the woman, and somehow I felt like calling for my mom would be rude, like interrupting something important. So for another week I kept waking up and watching her. I never told my mom she was still coming. I didn't tell anyone. Then came the night that still makes me emotional to this day. 2 weeks after the first appearance, I woke up as usual, but this time the bride wasn't alone. Next to her stood a man in what looked like a black tuxedo. He was just as featureless in the darkness, just a black silhouette against the dim light. They were holding hands, standing side by side, both facing the mirror. Not moving, not speaking, just standing there together. Again, I wasn't scared. If anything, I felt happy for her, like I was witnessing something special. I watched them for a few minutes, then fell back asleep with a strange sense of peace. They never came back after that night. Life went on, and I gradually stopped thinking about my nighttime visitors. We moved out of that house when I was 12 because my dad got transferred to another state. I remember feeling weirdly sad about leaving my room behind. When I was 16, we were looking through old family albums, and I saw pictures of our old house. That's when I asked my mom if she remembered the bride prank that Dad had supposedly played on me. My mom got really quiet, then asked my dad to go get some ice cream for dessert. Once he was gone, she sat me down. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Your father never projected anything into your room. I just said that because I didn't want to scare you." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "There was always something off about that house," she admitted. "I felt it the day we moved in. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps in the hallway at night when everyone was asleep. Things would move from where I left them, but I never saw anyone." I asked her why she didn't tell me the truth back then. What was I supposed to say to a 9-year-old? That I thought our house was haunted? That would have terrified you. I figured if you thought it was just your dad being silly, you wouldn't be scared. The weird thing is, I was never scared. Not once during those 2 weeks. Even now, thinking about it doesn't frighten me, but it does make me emotional in a way I can't explain. Sometimes when I tell this story, I start crying halfway through, and I have no idea why. It's not fear or sadness exactly, it's something else I don't have words for. A few years ago, I got curious and looked up the history of our old house online. I found out it was built in 1967 by a man named Robert Harmon. According to local newspaper archives, he was engaged to be married, but his fiancée died in a car accident 2 weeks before their wedding. Robert lived in the house alone until he died in 1992. The article included a picture of the couple from their engagement announcement. The bride-to-be was wearing a simple white dress in the photo. Not a wedding gown, but similar in style to what I remembered seeing on the woman in my room. Her hair was dark and long, just like the apparitions. I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe I was having some kind of sleep paralysis, though I could move freely. Maybe it was an incredibly vivid, recurring dream. Maybe there was some logical explanation for the whole thing. But deep down, I believe I witnessed something real. I think that woman, that bride who never got to have her wedding day, was looking for something in that mirror. Maybe she was looking for herself, for the life she never got to live. And after 2 weeks of searching, her groom finally found her, and they were able to move on together. I'm not religious or even particularly spiritual, but this experience has stayed with me. Sometimes I still dream about them, the bride and groom standing silently before the mirror, hand in hand. And even now, sitting alone in my apartment typing this out, tears are streaming down my face, and I can't tell you why. I just know that for 2 weeks when I was 9 years old, a woman in a wedding dress visited my room every night, and on the final night, her groom came to take her home. I was never afraid, only honored to witness their reunion, a wedding that never happened in life but somehow took place in the reflection of my bedroom mirror. Story 10. I still get chills thinking about what happened to me as a kid. It's been over 15 years, but I remember every detail like it was yesterday. I've never really shared this with anyone outside my family, but I need to get it off my chest. I grew up in Evergreen, this tiny mountain town that most people have never heard of. There were only about 300 people living there, and I went to a small Christian school with fewer than 100 students. Everyone knew everyone, which made what happened to me even more isolating because no one really believed me, except the girls who were there when it all started. It began when I was 12. Our school organized this camp at Barry's Sport and Recreation Center, about 4 hours away from home. My parents were excited for me. They thought it would be good for me to get away and have some fun with my classmates. I was pretty excited too until we actually got there. The moment our bus pulled up to Barry's, I felt this weird pressure in my chest. At first, I thought maybe I was just nervous about being away from home, but it wasn't like normal anxiety. It felt heavy, like someone was sitting on my chest. I remember looking around at my friends to see if anyone else felt it, but everyone else was laughing and grabbing their bags. Totally normal. Our teachers assigned us to cabins. I was with 4 other girls from my class in cabin 3. It was this old wooden building with bunk beds and a small bathroom. Nothing fancy, but it seemed fine during the day. The first day was normal. We did activities, had dinner in the main hall, and then went back to our cabins for the night. That first night is when things started getting weird. We were all getting ready for bed, taking turns in the bathroom, when I saw it, a tall shadow standing in the doorway. It wasn't one of the teachers or another student. It was just there, completely still, too tall to be a kid. I froze and stared at it, and after a few seconds, it just disappeared. Not like it walked away, but like it dissolved. I was so freaked out that I couldn't sleep in my own bed. I asked Sarah, one of my friends, if I could sleep on the floor next to her bunk. She thought I was being dramatic, but she let me. I barely slept that night. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a woman's voice. It was coming from outside, really soft but clear. She was calling out, "Max, Luke, it's safe to come home now. You can come out," over and over. I nudged Sarah awake, but by the time she was up, the voice had stopped. No one else heard it. The second day was normal again, more activities, more games. But I couldn't shake this feeling that something was off. I kept seeing shadows in my peripheral vision, and that pressure in my chest never went away. Then came the second night. We had dinner and then went to the recreation hall for some games. When we got back to our cabin, we all stopped dead in our tracks. The entire place was trashed. Our bags had been dumped out, clothes were thrown everywhere, the beds were messed up, and all the lights were on. We'd left everything neat and turned the lights off when we left. One of the girls, Emma, immediately started screaming, "Demon! It's a demon!" She was hysterical. The rest of us were frozen, staring at the mess. There was no way someone could have done this without a key, and our teacher had the only spare. Plus, we'd all been together the whole time. Our screams brought the teachers running. They tried to calm us down, saying it was probably just older kids playing a prank, but they couldn't explain how anyone got in. The doors and windows were all locked from the inside. The teachers helped us clean up and stayed until we calmed down, but none of us slept that night. We all pushed our beds together in the middle of the room and stayed awake, jumping at every little sound. The next day, our teachers called the camp staff, who insisted nothing like this had ever happened before. They checked the locks and found nothing broken. We finished out the camp, but nothing else happened, at least not at Barry's. The real nightmare started when I got home. At first, it was little things. Doors would rattle, even though there wasn't any draft. I'd hear footsteps when no one was there. Sometimes it sounded like children running up and down our stairs in the middle of the night. My mum would ask me why I was up so late, but I was in bed the whole time. Then it got worse. A clock jumped off the wall one night, didn't fall, jumped, and landed in the middle of the room. My guitar, which was on a stand in the corner of my room, would sometimes make sounds like someone was strumming it. Not like a string breaking, but actual notes. Whatever this thing was, it seemed to focus on me specifically. My bedroom was near the front door, and I would hear tapping on my windows at night, sometimes scratching on the walls, footsteps on the gravel outside, banging on the front door at 3 a.m, but when my dad checked, no one was there. The worst was the sleep paralysis. It started happening almost every night, always between 3 and 4 in the morning. I'd wake up completely frozen, unable to move or scream, feeling like someone was watching me. Sometimes I'd feel the edge of my bed sink down, like someone was sitting on it. Once, I even felt fingers brushing through my hair. One morning I woke up to find my bedroom door unlocked and wide open. I always locked it before bed. It became a habit after all this started. I know I locked it that night, but somehow it was open. My parents were concerned, but skeptical at first. They thought I was having nightmares because of stress or something I'd seen on TV. But when they started experiencing things too, hearing the footsteps, finding doors open that they'd closed, they began to believe me. We moved twice over the next few years, thinking maybe it was the house. But whatever this was, it followed us. It wasn't as intense in the second house, but still there, objects moving, strange sounds, that feeling of being watched. It wasn't until our third move, when I was 16, that it finally stopped. It was like crossing some invisible boundary broke whatever connection this thing had to me. Years later, when I was in college, I got curious and did some research on Barry's Sport and Recreation Center. What I found made my blood run cold. Before it was a recreation center, back in the 1940s and 50s, it had been a home for troubled boys. There were rumors that the staff had been abusive, really abusive. Some people claimed boys had been beaten to death there, though I couldn't find any official records confirming this. And Cabin 3, that had allegedly been the punishment room. When I read that, I nearly threw up. I'm not the only one who's had experiences there. I found forums where other people who'd stayed at Barry's shared similar stories, feeling watched, hearing voices, things moving on their own. I still don't know why whatever was there attached itself to me specifically. Maybe I was more sensitive to it somehow, or maybe it was just random bad luck. But I know what I experienced was real. It wasn't imagination or nightmares or stress. Something followed me home from that camp and it stayed with me for years. The scariest part wasn't the noises or the things moving. It was the feeling that whatever this was, it was conscious. It knew I was afraid, and it seemed to feed off that fear. It was intelligent enough to target me, to know how to scare me the most. I'm 28 now, and I haven't experienced anything paranormal in years, but I still sleep with a light on. I still check my door multiple times to make sure it's locked, and I still wake up sometimes at 3 in the morning, heart racing, feeling like I'm being watched. I've tried to find explanations: carbon monoxide, old houses settling, neighborhood kids playing pranks. But none of that explains everything that happened. None of that explains how it followed us from house to house, or how it started right after that camp. I've never gone back to Barry's. I've thought about it. Driving out there as an adult, facing whatever might still be there. But honestly, I'm terrified that if I did, it might attach to me again. Some doors are better left closed. Sometimes I wonder about those names I heard that first night. Max and Luke. Were they boys who lived at that home? Did something happen to them there? And who was the woman calling for them? I've looked through old records trying to find any mention of boys with those names at that facility, but haven't found anything definitive. I don't talk about this much. People either think I'm making it up, or they get that look, like they're worried about my mental health. But I know what I experienced. And sometimes I wonder how many other kids from my school experienced things after that camp, but were too scared to say anything. So that's my story. I still don't have answers, and maybe I never will. But whatever was at Barry's, whatever followed me home, it was real. And sometimes, late at night, I still find myself listening for footsteps on the stairs. Story 11. I've never told this story to many people because, honestly, it sounds crazy even to me. But I swear every word of it is true, and I still get chills thinking about it 7 years later. This happened back when I was 19, just after I dropped out of Youngstown State. I wasn't in a good place mentally. College wasn't working out, and my high school girlfriend had dumped me a few months earlier. I was staying at my older brother Keith's place in Cleveland, this rundown 2-story house he shared with 3 other guys. It was basically a party house, not the cleanest place, but it gave me somewhere to crash while I figured my life out. Keith and his roommates were all in their mid-20s, always having people over, drinking, playing video games until sunrise. They had 2 pit bulls in the basement, Chocolate and Diesel. Chocolate was always trying to escape and wander around the house. Sweet dog, but a real escape artist. I'd been dating this girl Jenna for about 2 months. Nothing serious, but she was cool, kind, smart, way more together than I was. She'd come over sometimes and hang out, usually spending the night since she lived across town. That particular Friday night in 2003 November, Keith and his friends were going to some club downtown. Jenna and I decided to stay in, order pizza, watch movies on the couch. Normal stuff. The house emptied out around 10, and it was just us. We watched some forgettable horror movie, had a couple beers. Around 1 in the morning, Jenna fell asleep on the bigger couch in the living room. I wasn't tired yet, so I went upstairs to play some Call of Duty in Keith's room. Around 3, I heard the front door open, voices and laughter. Keith and his friends were back, and they'd brought people with them. I went downstairs to say hi, and there were 3 girls I'd never seen before. Everyone was clearly drunk, in that loud, exaggerated way. Keith introduced me around, And this one girl, I think her name was Amber, kept making eye contact with me. I knew Jenna was asleep on the couch in the living room, but something about this Amber girl got to me. She was giving me these looks, you know. I'd been feeling pretty low about myself after dropping out, after my ex left me, and the attention felt good, really good. Keith and everyone headed to the kitchen to make drinks, and Amber brushed against me as she walked past. "Which room is yours?" she whispered. I should have shut it down right there, but I didn't. I nodded toward the stairs and said, "Second door on the right." My stomach was in knots. Part of me was thinking about Jenna asleep on the couch, but another part was just, I don't know, seeking validation or something. I told myself I'd just talk to Amber for a few minutes, nothing more. I waited about 5 minutes, then headed upstairs. When I got to the room, I stood outside the door for what felt like forever. I could hear everyone downstairs laughing. My heart was pounding in my chest. I finally went in, but the room was empty. I waited for maybe 10 minutes, feeling like an idiot, before Amber poked her head in. "Hey," she said, but her energy had changed. "Listen, your brother just told me you have a girlfriend downstairs. That's really messed up." She looked genuinely disgusted with me. I'm not into that, at all. She closed the door before I could say anything. The shame hit me like a punch to the gut. What the hell was I doing? I sat on the bed, my face burning with embarrassment and self-loathing. I could hear everyone still partying downstairs, and I couldn't face them. Couldn't face myself either. Eventually, I crept back downstairs. Most people had left, and Keith and his roommates had gone to their rooms. The living room was dark except for the glow of the TV someone had left on mute. Jenna was still asleep on the big couch, exactly where I'd left her hours earlier. She looked so peaceful, so trusting. The guilt was overwhelming. I couldn't bring myself to wake her, to lie next to her. I didn't deserve that. So I took the smaller couch near the entrance to the living room. It was shorter than I was, so my right arm hung off the edge, almost touching the floor. I lay there in the dark, hating myself, listening to the occasional creak of the old house and Jenna's soft breathing. I must have drifted off eventually, because the next thing I remember is being half awake. My eyes were heavy, and I was in that weird space between sleep and consciousness. That's when I heard it, the distinct sound of nails clicking on the hardwood floor. My first thought was that Chocolate had escaped from the basement again. This happened all the time. He'd somehow get the basement door open and wander around the house. I tried to sit up to grab him and put him back, but I couldn't move. Not a single muscle. My eyes were open, but everything else was frozen. I'd experienced sleep paralysis once before in high school, so I recognized what was happening and tried not to panic. Just wait it out, I told myself. It'll pass in a few seconds. That's when I felt something climb onto the couch. It was heavy enough to make the cushions sink. In my peripheral vision, I could see the dark shape of what I assumed was Chocolate moving along my body. Still unable to move, I just waited, figuring he'd settle down somewhere on the couch and I'd put him back in the basement once I could move again. But then I felt something cold and wet touch my hand, the one hanging off the couch. Dog's nose, I thought. Normal. But what came next wasn't normal at all. I felt teeth. Not a quick nip or playful bite. These teeth sank into my hand slowly, deliberately, one by one. I could feel each tooth as it broke skin, the pressure increasing gradually until it became unmistakably painful. The thing bit down harder, and I swear I could feel the teeth scraping against the bones in my hand. The pain was so real, so sharp. In my head I was screaming, but nothing came out. I was still completely paralyzed, with nothing but my eyes able to move. And here's the thing. When I managed to look down at what was biting me, all I could see was darkness. Not the shape of a dog, just darkness. The pain in my hand intensified. It felt like those teeth were going to sever my fingers. The pressure kept building and building until suddenly I could move. I jerked upright with a gasp, tumbling off the couch and onto the floor. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I scrambled to my feet, looking around wildly. The living room was empty except for Jenna, still sound asleep on the other couch, undisturbed by my panic. My first coherent thought was to check my hand. I held it up in the dim light from the TV, expecting to see blood, puncture wounds, something, but there was nothing. No marks, no pain, not even a red spot. Nothing. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It had felt so real. The weight on the couch, the wet nose, those teeth sinking into my flesh. I could still feel the ghost of that pain. "Chocolate?" I whispered, looking around. No sign of him. The house was completely silent. Still shaking, I went to the basement door. It was firmly closed, the way it always was, to keep the dogs contained. I opened it slowly, heart still racing, and peered down into the darkness. When my eyes adjusted, I could make out both dogs at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at me curiously. Chocolate and Diesel, both exactly where they were supposed to be. I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to calm myself down. What the hell had just happened? Sleep paralysis didn't explain the vivid sensation of teeth in my hand. A dream wouldn't have felt that real. I went back to the living room and looked at Jenna, still peacefully asleep. The shame of what I'd almost done earlier that night came flooding back. Had my guilt somehow manifested into whatever that was? Was my mind punishing me, or was it something else entirely? I couldn't bring myself to lie back down on that couch. Instead, I sat in the armchair across the room, wide awake until morning light started filtering through the windows. I kept looking at my hand, expecting marks to appear, but nothing ever did. When Jenna woke up, I couldn't tell her what happened. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? And I definitely couldn't tell her about Amber, about what I'd almost done, so I just said I hadn't slept well and suggested we go get breakfast. Jenna and I broke up a few weeks later for unrelated reasons. We were just at different points in our lives. But I've never forgotten that night, and I've never cheated on anyone since then. Not even come close. Whenever I'm tempted to do something I know is wrong, I remember the feeling of those teeth sinking into my hand, the pain, the fear. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was just an extremely vivid dream triggered by guilt. Maybe it was my subconscious creating a physical manifestation of my shame. Or maybe, and this is the thought that still keeps me up some nights, maybe it was something else, something that knew what I was planning to do, something that wanted to warn me. All I know for sure is that something bit me that night. I felt it. And whatever it wasn't one of the dogs. To this day, I still can't sleep with my hand hanging off the bed or couch, and sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, I swear I can hear the faint sound of nails clicking on hardwood floors. Story 12. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened during those 13 days at my father-in-law's house in Kathmandu. It's been 3 years, but I can't shake the feeling that something from beyond reached out to me that night. I never even met Rajesh when he was alive. He abandoned my husband Anand when he was just a baby, leaving his mother to raise him alone while he started a new life with another woman. Anand grew up without a father figure, and the few stories he heard about Rajesh weren't flattering. A heavy smoker with a quick temper who never sent money or checked on his firstborn son. When we got the call that Rajesh had died, I honestly didn't think we'd go. But Anand surprised me by immediately making travel arrangements. "It doesn't matter how I feel about him," he explained. "I'm his eldest son, and tradition requires me to perform the funeral rites. In Hindu custom, it's believed the soul can't find peace unless specific rituals are performed by the eldest son." Despite everything, Anand wouldn't deny his father this final respect. So there we were, flying to Kathmandu in July, when the heat is unbearable and the monsoon rains make everything sticky. I'd visited Nepal before for tourism, but this was different. The city felt oppressive under the weight of death and obligation. Rajesh's house was a 3-story concrete building in an older neighborhood. His second wife greeted us formally but coldly. Their son, Anand's half-brother whom he'd never met, seemed confused about why we were even there. The atmosphere was tense from the moment we arrived. According to tradition, we had to stay for 13 days to complete all the necessary rituals. 13 days. I kept thinking about all the work piling up back home, but I couldn't leave Anand to face this alone. The house quickly filled with relatives I'd never met, some sleeping in bedrooms, others on mats in the living room, and several of us on the rooftop terrace where at least there was occasionally a breeze. The days blurred together in a haze of rituals, incense, and prayers. I tried to be supportive, but I felt like an outsider. I didn't speak Nepali well, and many of the customs were unfamiliar to me despite having been married to Anand for 5 years. His relatives would explain things briefly, but I could tell they were annoyed at having to accommodate someone who didn't inherently understand. On the 10th day came a ritual I'll never forget. According to tradition, this is when the deceased spirit returns to eat their favorite foods one last time. Anand and other male relatives prepared an elaborate spread of Rajesh's preferred dishes, spicy goat curry, sel roti, and other traditional foods I didn't recognize. They also placed a cigarette beside the plate. Since Rajesh had been a chain smoker all his life, this is where things went wrong. Anand's half-brother, who seemed perpetually resentful of our presence, was in charge of the cigarette. Whether out of ignorance or deliberate disrespect, he placed it on the tulsi moth, a small altar housing the sacred basil plant that's considered holy in Hindu homes. Everyone gasped. One elderly aunt immediately rushed to remove it, muttering prayers to offset the sacrilege. "You never put anything impure near the tulsi," she scolded Anand's half-brother. "Especially not during the mourning period. The barriers between worlds are thin right now." I didn't think much of it at the time. I was exhausted from the heat, the constant rituals, and the emotional strain of supporting Anand through this complicated family situation. That night, like many others, several of us slept on the terrace because the bedrooms were too hot and overcrowded. I laid my mat in a corner, away from Anand's cousins who stayed up late talking. Sleep came quickly despite the humidity. I woke to screaming around 3 in the morning. It was Anand's cousin's sister, a woman in her 20s who had been sleeping near the stairs. She was pointing toward the small rooftop shrine where another tulsi plant grew, shrieking something in Nepali I couldn't understand. Everyone rushed to her side, but I was so tired I just sat up on my mat trying to make sense of the commotion. People were running downstairs now, following the hysterical woman. Anand touched my shoulder and said, "Stay here, I'll check what's happening," before disappearing down the stairwell. I lay back down, too exhausted to move. The terrace was suddenly empty except for me, with everyone's bedding abandoned in their rush to investigate. That's when it happened. I was drifting back to sleep when I felt a firm tug on my leg. Not a gentle touch, but a deliberate pull, as if someone was trying to get my attention. The sensation was so real and forceful that I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called out, but the terrace was empty. The pull had been unmistakable, like a strong hand gripping my ankle and yanking downward. I scrambled up, suddenly wide awake and terrified. The rooftop was dimly lit by the city's glow, and I could clearly see there was nobody there. The stairwell entrance was visible from where I stood, and nobody had come up or gone down without me noticing. I was completely alone, yet something had physically touched me. My skin crawled with goosebumps despite the warm night. I ran to the stairwell and practically tumbled down the steps to find the others. They were gathered in the main prayer room, surrounding the young woman who was still trembling and crying. When I entered, an elderly aunt looked at my face and immediately asked, "You felt it too, didn't you?" I nodded, unable to speak. Anand came to my side, his expression concerned. Through translations and fragmented conversations, I learned what had happened. The young woman had awakened to a strange, nasal voice, exactly how Rajesh had spoken in life, according to those who knew him, shouting angrily near the window. When she looked, she saw a shadowy figure moving toward the tulsi moth, gesturing angrily. She described it not as a full apparition, but as a dark shape with the unmistakable gait and posture of an elderly man. "He's angry about the cigarette," the elderly aunt declared with absolute certainty. "He was a smoker, yes. But even he knew better than to disrespect the Tulsi. His spirit is disturbed by the sacrilege. What struck me most was how everyone accepted this explanation without question. There was no debate about whether it had really happened or if the woman had been dreaming. The presence of Rajesh's spirit was taken as fact, and the focus was entirely on appeasing his anger. When I described the pulling of my leg, several people nodded knowingly. "He's acknowledging you," one of Rajesh's elderly friends said. "Strange that he would reach out to you and not his son or second wife." That comment caused a visible ripple of discomfort among Rajesh's second family. His widow looked at me with barely concealed hostility, as if I'd somehow orchestrated this to embarrass them. Her son, the one who had placed the cigarette incorrectly, refused to look at me at all. The rest of the night was spent in prayers and small ceremonies to appease Rajesh's spirit. Anand performed additional rituals at the Tulsi Moth, asking forgiveness for the disrespect shown. I sat nearby, still feeling the phantom sensation of fingers around my ankle. Morning came with no further incidents, but the atmosphere in the house had changed. Rajesh's second family was noticeably colder toward us, while the extended relatives treated me with a new kind of respect. Or perhaps it was caution. They kept asking if I had any other experiences, or if I had particularly sensitive spiritual abilities. I didn't, of course. I'd always considered myself practical and skeptical about supernatural claims, but how could I explain what had happened? I was wide awake when I felt that pull on my leg. There was no one there, no logical explanation for the physical sensation I experienced. I've gone over it countless times in my mind, trying to rationalize it as a muscle spasm or a half-dream, but I know what I felt. The following days passed in a blur of concluding rituals. On the 13th and final day, when the last ceremonies were complete, there was almost a physical lifting of weight from the house. We packed our bags to leave, and I couldn't wait to get on the plane home. As we were saying our goodbyes, Rajesh's widow pulled me aside unexpectedly. Her English was limited, but her message was clear. "He recognizes you," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Not me, not my son, you, the outsider." There was bitterness in her voice, but also a reluctant acknowledgement. "You were right one to come." I didn't know how to respond. I hadn't wanted to come at all. I was only there for Anand's sake. But something about her words settled into me with uncomfortable weight. Why would Rajesh's spirit reach out to me, of all people? On the flight home, Anand told me something he'd learned from one of his father's old friends. Apparently, Rajesh had abandoned his first family partly because his mother, Anand's grandmother, had disapproved of his choice of wife. There had been a bitter argument about tradition and family duty. "You look remarkably like my grandmother when she was young," Anand said quietly. "There are old photos at my mother's house. The resemblance is striking." A chill ran through me despite the airplane's stuffy air. Had Rajesh's spirit mistaken me for his mother? Was he trying to communicate with the parent who had disapproved of his life choices? Or was he acknowledging some karmic circle, seeing his mother's likeness in the wife of the son he'd abandoned? I still don't know what happened that night in Kathmandu. What I do know is that something reached across whatever divides the living from the dead and made contact with me. Something, or someone, who recognized me, or thought they did. Something strong enough to physically pull my leg with a grip I can still feel when I think about it. We never returned to Nepal, and Anand rarely speaks of his father. But sometimes when I smell cigarette smoke wafting from somewhere I can't identify, I feel that same prickling sensation on my skin, a reminder perhaps that family connections don't simply vanish, even when severed by abandonment, strained by resentment, or separated by the ultimate boundary of death itself. Story 13. I've always considered myself pretty grounded when it comes to paranormal stuff. Ghost stories, fun around a campfire but not real. Hauntings, just people's imaginations running wild in old creaky houses. That was me, Jackson Miller, 32, software developer and certified skeptic, until what happened at Lower Lewis Falls. This all went down last summer when my buddy Chris and I decided to do a weekend camping trip in Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington. We'd both been stressed with work, and the idea of disconnecting for a couple days sounded perfect. Chris had camped near Lower Lewis Falls before and wouldn't shut up about how beautiful it was, so we packed up his Subaru and headed out early on a Friday morning in July. The drive took about 3 hours from Portland, most of it through these gorgeous winding forest roads. When we finally arrived, I understood why Chris had been so excited. The falls were spectacular, about 50 feet high with multiple cascades tumbling over this wide ledge of volcanic rock. The water below was this incredible turquoise color that didn't even look real. We found a decent spot to set up camp not far from the falls, close enough to hear the water, but not so close that we'd get soaked by mist or anything. We spent that afternoon hiking around, taking photos, and just enjoying being away from computers and deadlines. By early evening, we'd set up our hammocks near the base of the falls, built a small fire, and cracked open some beers. That's when things were still normal. After dinner, Chris wanted to try night fishing downstream, but I was beat from the drive and the hiking. I told him I'd hang back and just chill in my hammock for a while. It was around 9 in the evening, still light enough to see, but definitely getting darker. I grabbed my headphones, thinking I'd listen to a podcast, but then decided against it. The sound of the waterfall was pretty amazing on its own, so I just lay there in my hammock, staring up at the canopy of trees, listening to the thundering water. It was loud, not conversation-stopping loud, but definitely a constant roar. At first, it was just white noise, the kind of sound that eventually fades into the background when you get used to it. But then something changed. I can't pinpoint exactly when I first noticed it. The transformation was so gradual. The waterfall's roar started to organize itself. That sounds weird, but I don't know how else to describe it. It was like my brain began picking out patterns in the chaos of the water sounds. At first I thought I was just zoning out, maybe starting to fall asleep. But I was wide awake, completely alert. The sound morphed into something that reminded me of frogs chirping, rhythmic, repetitive. I actually sat up and looked around for frogs, but there weren't any that I could see. Then the sound shifted again. The chirping synchronized and deepened, becoming something like drum beats. Not modern drums, more primitive, like those nature documentary soundtracks when they show indigenous tribes. Boom, boom, boom. A steady, hypnotic rhythm that seemed to echo through the entire forest. I remember checking my watch at this point. It was 9:45. I'd been lying there for maybe 30 minutes, and I was getting seriously freaked out. But some part of me was also fascinated. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe some weird acoustic phenomenon caused by the shape of the falls and the surrounding rocks. But then the drumming gave way to chanting. I swear on everything I care about, I heard voices. Multiple voices, all chanting in unison, not in English or any language I recognized. The sound was coming from the waterfall itself, or at least that's what it seemed like. The chanting was low at first, almost underneath the drums, but it grew louder, more insistent. I sat up in my hammock, heart pounding. I was completely alone. Chris was still downstream somewhere. I called out his name, but my voice sounded pathetic against the waterfalls, whatever it was doing. The chanting accelerated. It got faster and higher pitched, taking on an urgent quality. And then, this is the part that still gives me chills, it transformed into wailing. Actual human-sounding wailing, like people in extreme distress or pain. And finally, screaming. Not horror movie screaming, but something worse, the kind of primal screams humans only make in their most desperate moments. I scrambled out of my hammock and nearly fell on my face. My legs were shaking so bad I could barely stand. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the falls, half expecting to see, I don't even know what. But there was nothing, just water crashing down over rocks like it had been doing for thousands of years. But the screaming continued. It seemed to be coming from everywhere. The water, the trees, the very air around me. I backed away, stumbling toward our tent, never taking my eyes off the falls, and then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The waterfall was just a waterfall again. Regular rushing water sounds. Nothing more. I sat outside our tent for over an hour, waiting for Chris to get back. I didn't want to be alone in that tent. I kept my flashlight on the whole time, scanning the tree line, the falls, everywhere. But everything was normal, just normal forest night sounds. When Chris finally returned around 11:30, I was still sitting there, probably looking like I'd seen a ghost. He asked what was wrong, and I hesitated. I mean, how do you tell someone you heard a waterfall turn into screaming voices without sounding completely insane? I decided to play it cool. Nothing. Just enjoying the night, I said. I figured I'd sleep on it. Maybe I'd dozed off without realizing and had some kind of weird waking dream. Maybe I'd just worked myself up after being alone in an unfamiliar place. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd jerk awake, convinced I was hearing those chants again. But the waterfall stayed a waterfall all night long. The next morning over breakfast, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Hey man, this is gonna sound crazy, but did you hear anything weird last night? Like from the waterfall? Chris stopped eating and gave me this look. Not a "you're crazy" look, but something else. What did you hear? He asked carefully. So I told him. Everything. The progression from frog sounds to drums to chanting to screaming. As I described it, his face got paler and paler. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I heard it too. About 3 weeks ago when I was camping here with my brother. That's why I wanted to go fishing last night, to get away from the falls after dark. I felt this weird mix of relief and horror. Relief that I wasn't losing my mind, but horror that whatever I'd experienced was real enough that someone else had heard it too. Why didn't you warn me? I asked. He shrugged. Would you have believed me? Would you have still come? He had a point. I wouldn't have believed him, and I probably would have still come, thinking he was exaggerating or had fallen asleep and dreamed it. We packed up early that day and headed home. Neither of us wanted to spend another night there. On the drive back, Chris told me he'd mentioned the sounds to a park ranger once, casually, like he was just curious about weird acoustics or something. The ranger had gotten real quiet, then said something about how the Lewis River and the forest on the opposite bank had history. When Chris pressed for details, the ranger just said that local indigenous tribes had considered the area sacred, and there were stories about it being haunted. I spent the next few months trying to rationalize what had happened. I researched acoustic phenomena, waterfall sounds, auditory pareidolia, anything that might explain how two different people could hear the same progression of unnatural sounds from a natural water source. I found some interesting theories about how water hitting rocks at certain angles can create sounds that our brains interpret as speech-like, but nothing that fully explained what we'd experienced. Despite all that, a year later, I agreed to go back. I know, sounds stupid, right? But I had to know if it would happen again. This time, Chris brought along his cousin Jake, who thought we were both full of shit when we told him the story. We camped farther downstream, about a quarter mile from the falls, close enough to still hear the water, but not right at the base like before. The first night passed uneventfully. I almost convinced myself that the previous year had been some kind of shared hallucination. But on the second night, while Chris and Jake were setting up for night fishing, I wandered back toward the falls alone. I don't know why I did it. Curiosity? A need for proof? Whatever the reason, I found myself standing at the same spot where my hammock had been the previous year, and it happened again, the exact same progression. Frogs, drums, chanting, wailing, screaming. This time I recorded it on my phone, but when I played it back later, all you could hear was normal waterfall sounds. Nothing else. When I ran back to camp and told Chris, he believed me immediately. Jake didn't hear anything when we dragged him up there later, and the recording didn't capture it, so he still thinks we're crazy or playing some elaborate prank. That was 3 weeks ago. I still have the recording on my phone, and sometimes I play it back, straining to hear even a hint of what I know was there. But there's nothing. I've spent hours researching the history of the area since then. I found some mentions of the local Cowlitz and Yakima tribes considering the area around Lewis River sacred, but nothing specific about the falls being haunted. I even tried contacting some tribal historians, but haven't heard back, so that's where I'm at now. I know what I heard. Chris knows what he heard, but we have no explanation. Was it some kind of acoustic phenomenon that only happens under specific conditions? Was it something supernatural, some kind of residual haunting tied to events from the past? Or is there something about that place that affects certain people's minds, making them hear things that aren't really there? I don't know. But I do know that I'm not camping near Lower Lewis Falls ever again. The next time someone tells me a place is haunted, I'm going to listen. Because sometimes the water doesn't just roar, sometimes it speaks, and I never want to hear what it has to say again. Story 14. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened to me 2 nights ago. I've been replaying it over and over, trying to make sense of it, but I can't. I'm not the type who believes in ghosts or supernatural stuff. I'm 31, work in IT, and generally consider myself pretty rational. But what I saw on my laptop screen that night, I just can't explain it. Like most nights, I was winding down before bed by watching some YouTube videos. Nothing unusual about that. I've been a fan of zero punctuation for years. Those quick-witted game reviews always help me decompress after a long day at work. I had started watching around 10 in the evening, and YouTube was doing its autoplay thing, jumping from one video to the next. I remember it was a compilation from 2008. You know how it goes. You start watching one video, then another, and soon you're 3 hours deep into content you didn't even search for. The compilation was pretty long, and I must have dozed off somewhere around 11. My laptop was on the bed beside me, still playing videos while I drifted off. What happened next is what I can't stop thinking about. I woke up around 12:45. I remember checking the time on my phone right after everything happened. What woke me wasn't natural. It wasn't my alarm or my bladder or a noise from outside. It was this sound coming from my laptop, a high-pitched ringing that kept cutting in and out, mixed with what sounded exactly like old television static. You know that fuzzy white noise when you'd tune to a dead channel on those old CRT TVs? Exactly that. At first, I was in that weird half-asleep state where nothing quite registers properly. But that sound, it was so jarring that it pulled me right out of my drowsiness. When I opened my eyes and looked at my laptop screen, I felt this immediate rush of, I don't know how to describe it. Dread, confusion, panic, all of those. The screen wasn't showing zero punctuation anymore. Instead, there was this video playing. The background was stark white, almost painfully bright in my dark bedroom, and against this white background were these black figures. Not like people exactly, more like distorted silhouettes or shapes that weren't quite right. They moved in ways that felt unnatural, jerky and twitchy. But the worst part was this face. This distorted, warped face that kept circling around what looked like a square box in the center of the screen. The face wasn't normal. It had features that were all wrong, stretched and compressed in places where they shouldn't be. Its eyes were too big. Its mouth seemed to extend too far across what should have been its cheeks. The whole image kept glitching out, not like buffering. This was different. It would jump and skip and distort itself even further, like someone was rapidly changing the tracking on an old VHS tape, and with each visual glitch came this sound. Like a record skipping, but harsher, more electronic. It was this crst sound that seemed to physically hurt my ears. I'm not exaggerating when I say I felt a genuine fear watching this. Not just, oh, that's creepy, but a deep, primal kind of fear. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I had this overwhelming urge to look away, like I shouldn't be seeing whatever this was. I threw my hand up to shield my eyes. It was instinct, like when you accidentally walk in on someone changing clothes. With my other hand, I frantically reached for the keyboard to close the browser or hit escape or whatever would make it stop. My fingers were trembling so badly I missed the keys a couple times. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone, just like that. When I lowered my hand, my screen was showing another zero punctuation video, one about some game I don't even remember now. The audio was normal, that sarcastic British voice carrying on like nothing had happened. No static, no ringing, no skipping. I sat there for what felt like forever, just staring at the screen, trying to process what I'd seen. My first thought was that I must have dreamed it, but I was wide awake now. My heart was still racing, and I had that lingering adrenaline feeling you get after a scare. This wasn't a dream. It was too vivid, too detailed. After a few minutes of trying to calm myself down, I decided to keep watching normal videos. I know that sounds weird. Who would continue watching YouTube after something like that? But I guess I was trying to normalize the situation, convince myself that everything was fine now. Plus, I didn't want to go to sleep right away with those images still fresh in my mind. I must have fallen back asleep eventually, because I woke up the next morning with my laptop battery dead beside me. The whole experience felt distant in the daylight, like maybe I had overreacted or misremembered something. The first thing I did was plug in my laptop and check my browser history. I was absolutely certain I'd find that weird video there, which would confirm it wasn't just some half-asleep hallucination. But when I scrolled through my history, there was nothing unusual, just a string of zero punctuation videos, one after another, with timestamps that matched my viewing from 10 p.m. until I fell asleep. The weird thing was, there was about a 1-minute gap between two legitimate videos around the time I remembered seeing the strange content, but that could easily be explained by YouTube's rounding of timestamps or the time it takes to load a new video. There was no record of anything unusual being played, nothing that matched what I saw. I spent way too much time yesterday searching for anything remotely similar to what I saw. I typed in all sorts of keywords: white background, black figures, distorted face circling box, glitching faces YouTube, and dozens of other combinations. Nothing came up that looked anything like what I saw. I even went into my YouTube watch history specifically, thinking maybe it wouldn't show in my browser history for some reason. Nothing there either, just the same string of gaming reviews, with nothing unusual interrupting them. I've been trying to rationalize this experience ever since. Maybe it was some kind of ad that somehow bypassed my ad blocker, but I've never seen an ad that disturbing, and why wouldn't it show up in my history? Could it have been some weird glitch where YouTube accidentally played something from a completely different part of the site? But again, where's the record of it? The thing is, I've never experienced sleep paralysis before. I've never had trouble distinguishing dreams from reality. I wasn't drinking that night or taking any medication that could cause hallucinations. I was just a normal guy watching YouTube before bed, like I've done hundreds of times before. What makes this even creepier is that I can't find any logical explanation. If it was just a weird video someone uploaded, why can't I find any trace of it? If it was a glitch, why was it so coherent? Disturbing, yes, but it felt like it was designed to be disturbing, not just random visual noise. And the timing is what gets me too. It happened exactly when I was drifting in and out of sleep, in that vulnerable state where your mind is halfway between consciousness and dreams. It's almost like something knew when to appear. That thought keeps creeping back, no matter how much I try to dismiss it. I've told a couple of close friends, but they just suggested the obvious, that I was dreaming, or that it was some bizarre half-asleep hallucination. But I know what I saw. I know how it made me feel. The fear was real. Last night I made sure to close YouTube completely before going to sleep. I even unplugged my laptop and put it on my desk across the room. I slept with a small light on. I feel ridiculous admitting that, a grown man afraid of a YouTube video, but something about that distorted face and those unnatural movements really got under my skin. I keep wondering if anyone else has experienced something similar. Was this some kind of creepypasta-style video that got uploaded and then quickly removed? Was it some kind of targeted content that somehow found its way to me specifically? Or was it something else entirely, something I can't even begin to comprehend? I know how this sounds. Trust me, I do. If someone told me this story, I'd probably think they were exaggerating or misremembering something they saw while half asleep, but I can still see those black figures moving against that harsh white background. I can still hear that static and that high-pitched ringing cutting in and out, and most of all, I can still see that face, that distorted, wrong face circling around that box, like it was studying it, or worshipping it, or I don't know. It's been 2 days now, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've gone back to watching YouTube, but only during daylight hours, and I make sure autoplay is turned off. I'm still searching for any explanation, combing through obscure forums and discussion boards for anyone who might have seen something similar. Maybe it was just a glitch, maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me as I was falling asleep, but whatever it was, it felt real. Too real, and the fact that I can't find any evidence that it existed makes it somehow worse, not better. I don't know if I'll ever figure out what I saw that night. Part of me hopes I do, just so I can put this behind me. But another part of me is afraid of what the explanation might be, because whatever that video was, whatever made those sounds and showed those images, it didn't feel like it belonged on YouTube. It didn't feel like it belonged anywhere in our normal world. Story 15. I still can't explain what happened to me last month, and I'm hoping writing it down might help me process it. I've been a student at UCSD for 3 years now, and nothing remotely strange had ever happened to me on campus until that day. It was a Thursday afternoon in October, around 4:30. I had just finished my evolutionary biology lecture in York Hall and was heading to the bus stop near Price Center. It was that time when everyone's trying to get home, so the stop was packed with students. I remember being annoyed because I had readings to finish for my morning class the next day, and the crowded bus meant I'd probably have to stand the whole ride home. I was scrolling through Instagram while waiting, half paying attention to the crowd around me. That's when I first noticed her. Among all the students in hoodies, jeans, and backpacks, there was this woman who looked completely out of place. She had to be in her late 30s or early 40s, with this perfectly styled blonde hair cut short and gelled back. It reminded me of those old photos of Marilyn Monroe, that very precise 1950s look. She was wearing a fitted pencil skirt that went below her knees, matching jacket, and these pristine white gloves, like she'd stepped straight out of an old movie or something. The weirdest part, nobody seemed to notice her, like, at all. Students were bumping into each other, complaining about the wait, but everyone gave this woman a wide berth without even looking at her. I remember thinking maybe she was a theater professor or something, dressed for a performance. I went back to my phone, but I kept feeling this weird sensation like someone was watching me. When I looked up again, she had somehow moved through the entire crowd and was standing directly in front of me. I swear I never saw her walk over. She was just suddenly there. Up close, she was even more striking. Her makeup was flawless but heavy in that vintage way. Red lipstick, perfectly drawn eyebrows, and skin that looked almost polished. That's the only word I can think of. Her eyes were this intense blue that didn't seem natural. We made eye contact, and I literally couldn't look away. My stomach dropped and I got goosebumps all over my arms. For like 10 full seconds, we just stared at each other. Then she spoke, and her voice had this accent I can't quite place. Kind of formal, like people in old films. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said. That's it. Just those 5 words. Before I could even respond, she turned and walked away, not toward the street or the campus. She just walked straight through the crowd, and somehow I lost sight of her immediately. It was like she dissolved into thin air. I remember standing there feeling completely weirded out. My first thought was that it must be some theater student doing a prank or a social experiment, or maybe she was flirting in some bizarre way. I tried to brush it off, but my hands were shaking when I put my phone back in my pocket. The bus finally arrived, and the ride home was uneventful. I kept replaying the encounter in my head and getting more annoyed about it. Like, who does that? Who dresses up in a costume to freak out random students at a bus stop? When I got home, my mom was making dinner like usual. Everything seemed totally normal, which made me feel better. Mom asked about my day, and I almost mentioned the weird woman but decided against it. It seemed too silly to bring up. I spent the evening working on assignments and watching Netflix. Around 10, I was getting ready for bed when I heard my mom's phone ring. I didn't think much of it at first. She gets calls from my aunts all the time, but then I heard this sound I'll never forget, this awful wailing cry that didn't even sound like my mom. I ran to the living room and found her collapsed on the couch, phone still in her hand, sobbing uncontrollably. It took me a full minute to get her to tell me what happened. My uncle Rob, my mom's younger brother, had been in a motorcycle accident on the highway. He died at the scene. I sat with my mom for hours that night, holding her while she cried. Uncle Rob wasn't someone I was super close with. He lived in Arizona, and I only saw him once or twice a year at family gatherings. But my mom adored him. They'd grown up really close, and even though they lived in different states, they talked almost every day. It wasn't until much later, after my mom had finally fallen asleep on the couch and I was lying in my bed staring at the ceiling, that the woman's words came back to me. "I'm sorry for your loss." The timing was too perfect. There's no way it could be a coincidence, right? Uncle Rob had the accident around 7 that evening, according to what the police told my mom. That was hours after the woman spoke to me. How could she possibly have known? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was just saying something random. Maybe I misheard her. Maybe it was all just a weird coincidence. But the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that something impossible had happened. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I kept replaying every detail of the encounter in my mind, the way no one else seemed to notice her, the way she appeared in front of me without walking through the crowd, the outdated clothes, the strange accent, the unnatural blue of her eyes, and those 5 words that somehow predicted a death in my family before it happened. The next morning, I went online and started researching UCSD ghost stories. I found nothing about a blonde woman in 1950s clothing. I searched local historical records for anything about a woman matching her description who might have died on or near campus. Nothing. I even went back to that same bus stop the next week, same time of day, hoping maybe she'd be there again. She wasn't. I asked some of the regulars who wait there every day if they'd ever seen someone matching her description. They all looked at me like I was crazy. For the next few days, I was in this weird fog. I was helping my mom with funeral arrangements and trying to keep up with my classes, but my mind kept drifting back to the woman. I started having nightmares about her standing at the foot of my bed, saying those same 5 words over and over. The worst part is not knowing why she chose me. Was it random? Did she know I was related to Uncle Rob specifically? Was she trying to warn me? Or just stating a fact she somehow knew? And if she could predict one death, what else might she know? I tried talking to my roommate about it, but she just suggested I was processing grief in a weird way, or that maybe I'd seen the woman after finding out about my uncle and my brain had mixed up the timeline. But I know what I saw and when I saw it. 3 weeks have passed now, and I haven't seen the woman again. We had the funeral for Uncle Rob last weekend. While we were at the cemetery, I kept scanning the crowd, half expecting to see her standing among the mourners with that same intense stare. She wasn't there. I did notice something at the funeral, though. There was a display of old family photos, including one of my mom and Uncle Rob as kids with their parents. In the background of one picture from what must have been the mid-1960s, there was a blonde woman standing near a tree. The photo was black and white and pretty grainy, but something about her posture looked familiar. I asked my mom who it was, and she said she had no idea. Probably just a stranger who happened to be in the cemetery that day. I've been back to that bus stop several times since then. Each time I stand exactly where I was standing that day, hoping she'll appear again so I can ask her how she knew. So far, nothing. Last night, I had another dream about her. This time, she was sitting on the edge of my bed, her white-gloved hand resting near my feet. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, just like before, but then she added something new. "It's not over yet." I woke up in a cold sweat, heart pounding. I don't know if it was just a nightmare created by my anxious brain or something more. All I know is I'm terrified to find out what she might have meant. My mom's been talking about moving back to Arizona to be closer to her sister after what happened to Uncle Rob. Part of me wants to go with her to get as far away from that bus stop as possible. But another part of me is afraid the woman might follow me. That distance won't matter to whatever she is. I don't believe in ghosts or psychics or any of that supernatural stuff. At least I didn't before. Now, I don't know what to believe. All I know is that a stranger somehow predicted a death in my family hours before it happened, and I can't explain it. I keep my phone camera ready all the time now, hoping to catch a glimpse of her if she ever comes back. I've started looking more carefully at crowds, studying the faces of everyone around me. Sometimes I think I see her out of the corner of my eye, that distinctive blonde hair, those formal clothes. But when I turn to look, it's always just a normal student or professor. I haven't told my mom about any of this. She's dealing with enough right now, but I needed to tell someone to get this off my chest. Has anyone else ever experienced something like this? I need to know I'm not losing my mind. Story 16. I've never really told this story to many people. When I mention it casually, I usually get those looks. You know the ones, where people think you're either making it up or you were just a kid with an overactive imagination. But I swear on everything I care about, what happened in that house was real, and it still gives me chills thinking about it 20 years later. We moved into that house when I was 9. My dad got transferred for work, and we ended up in this newer development about an hour away from where we'd been living. The house itself wasn't old or creepy looking or anything like you'd expect. It was actually really nice. 2 stories with a finished basement, big backyard, the works. Nothing about it screamed haunted from the outside. No creaky doors, no weird history that the realtor told us about, just a normal house in a normal neighborhood. But I felt it the first day we moved in. That feeling in the pit of your stomach, like you're being watched, like you're not alone, even when you are. My little sister felt it too, though she was only 7 at the time. The basement was the worst. It was finished with a family room area, a small bathroom, and a storage room. My parents were so excited about the extra space, talking about movie nights and stuff. But there was something about that bathroom down there. Neither my sister nor I would use it, not ever. My mom would ask why, and we'd just say it felt weird. We couldn't explain it better than that when we were kids. It just felt wrong, like someone was in there with you, breathing down your neck, even when the door was locked. About 2 months after we moved in, my mom started noticing things. She'd see shadows moving up and down the stairs, not like when sunlight creates shadows as it moves through windows. These were on the stairs leading to the basement, and there weren't any windows nearby that could explain it. Just dark shapes moving up and down, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but always when you least expected it. Our dogs, we had 2 labs back then, they hated those stairs. They'd sleep on them sometimes during the day, but then they'd suddenly jump up and run away, yelping like someone had stepped on them. But no one was there, at least no one we could see. The smaller things were easy to brush off at first. Things would be moved from where we left them. Keys that were on the counter would be on the dining room table. A book that was on your nightstand would be on the floor in the morning. My mom would blame my dad would blame us kids, and we'd deny it. Round and round it went. Then the bigger stuff started happening. We had this family photo in the hallway upstairs. It was in a heavy frame, and my dad had mounted it securely to the wall when we moved in. It had been up there for almost a year without any issues. One night, around 2 in the morning, we all woke up to a huge crash. The picture had fallen. No, not fallen. It had been thrown. It was halfway down the hallway. The glass shattered everywhere. My dad checked the wall. checked the mounting hardware. Nothing was broken or loose. There was no explanation for how it could have moved that far on its own. Another time, when I was 10, my dad was away on a business trip. My mom decided we should have a fun night and have a sleepover in the basement. Yeah, the basement that gave us all the creeps. But she insisted it would be fun, that we'd watch movies and eat popcorn and sleep on air mattresses. My sister and I went along with it, mostly because we didn't want to seem scared. We actually had a good time watching movies, and by midnight, we were all tired and ready for bed. We had the 3 air mattresses set up, and we were all tucked in. The only light was coming from a lamp in the corner. My mom asked, "Who's going to get up and turn off the light?" None of us volunteered. Then, I swear this is true, the light went out by itself, just clicked off. We all froze. My sister started crying. My mom tried to play it off, saying it must have been a power surge or something. But in the morning when she checked, the light worked perfectly fine. The switch wasn't loose, the bulb wasn't burned out, nothing was wrong with it. But the worst experience, the one that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it, happened to me directly when I was 11. I had my own room upstairs across from my sister's. My parents' room was at the end of the hall. One night I woke up around 3 in the morning. I'm not sure what woke me, no noise or anything. I just suddenly was awake, and I wasn't alone. Sitting in my desk chair, about 6 feet from my bed, was an old woman. She had this perfectly styled gray hair, the kind that older ladies get done at the salon once a week. She was wearing what looked like a nightgown or maybe a house dress. I couldn't really tell in the dark, but I could clearly see the pearl necklace she was wearing. It almost seemed to glow a little in the darkness. At first I thought I was dreaming. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, but she was still there. And then, this is the part that made me nearly wet myself. She slowly turned her head and looked right at me. Her eyes, I can't explain it. They were just empty somehow. Not angry or scary, just empty. Like she wasn't really seeing me, even though she was looking at me. I pulled my blanket over my head. I was terrified to make a sound. I counted to 100 in my head, trying to calm down. When I finally got the courage to peek out again, the chair was empty. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I kept the blanket pulled up to my chin, staring at that chair until the sun came up. I told my mom the next morning. I expected her not to believe me, but she got this look on her face. She asked me to describe the woman again, especially the pearl necklace. After I did, she got really quiet and went to call my grandmother. Later, she showed me an old photo of my great-grandmother who had died long before I was born. She was wearing a pearl necklace in the photo. But here's the weird thing. I'd never seen a picture of her before. My mom had kept the old family photos in an album in her closet, and I had never looked through it. That freaked me out even more, honestly. If it had just been some random ghost, that would have been scary enough. But the idea that it might have been a relative I'd never met, I didn't know what to do with that information. The activity in the house seemed to increase after that night. Lights would turn on and off by themselves. The TV in the living room would switch channels on its own. My sister's toys would be arranged in circles on her floor when we'd come home from school, even though no one had been in the house. My mom had to replace nearly every light bulb in the house multiple times over those months. They'd burn out constantly, sometimes the same day after being replaced. It was like whatever was in the house didn't want us to have light. Or maybe, looking back, it was trying to get our attention the only way it knew how. The last straw came about 3 months after I saw the woman in my room. We were all sitting at the dinner table. Out of nowhere, all the cabinet doors in the kitchen flew open at once. Not slowly, not one by one, all of them, simultaneously, like someone had run through the kitchen and flung each one open in a split second. The noise was deafening, like a gunshot in our small kitchen. My dad, who had been the skeptic all along, finally admitted something wasn't right. 2 weeks later, he requested a transfer back to our old city. Within a month, we were moving out. The weird thing is, as terrified as I was in that house, on our last day there, I felt almost sad. If the ghost was my great-grandmother, had she just been trying to connect with us? Was she watching over us rather than trying to scare us? I'll never know. We've been gone from that house for 20 years now, but I still sometimes dream about those stairs to the basement, those shadows moving up and down, and sometimes, in the dream, I follow them down to see who or what is casting them, but I always wake up before I find out. I've looked up the house online a few times over the years. It's had 3 different owners since us. I've thought about contacting them to ask if they've experienced anything, but I never have. Part of me doesn't want to know. My mum still believes the house was built on what used to be First Nations land, possibly with unmarked graves underneath or nearby. The development was pretty new when we moved in, and she'd heard rumors that the construction company had rushed through some of the cultural and historical assessments to get building permits. But we never found any concrete evidence of that. All I know is what I experienced. That house changed me. I'm not religious or particularly spiritual, but I know there are things in this world that we can't explain, things that exist beyond what we can see or touch. I felt them. I saw them. In that house between the ages of 9 and 12. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night and I catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, I wonder if she followed us. Story 17. I still get goosebumps thinking about that night in Batangas. It's been 7 years, but I can recall every detail like it happened yesterday. I've never shared this with anyone except my closest friends, but I need to get this off my chest. When I was 16, my parents sent me to live with my Aunt Mariela in a coastal town in Batangas. They thought I was getting too wild in Manila, which basically meant I talked to boys and came home after 8 p.m. sometimes. My aunt was this super religious woman who worked as a pastor with American missionaries. She was my mom's older sister and had this reputation in our family as the disciplinarian who could straighten out troubled teens. The place we lived in was this old missionary campus that had these massive century-old buildings. Everything creaked. The wood floors, the staircases, even the walls seemed to make noise when the wind blew. My aunt's unit was on the 2nd floor of this massive stone building that used to be some kind of administrative center during the American colonial period. The missionaries had converted it into apartments, but they kept most of the original structure. From day one, Aunt Mariela set these ridiculous rules. No going out after 6 p.m., no talking to boys, no internet except for homework, no phone after 9 p.m. I basically felt like I was in prison. She'd wake me up at 5 in the morning to pray. Then I'd go to the local Catholic school where she'd enrolled me, then come straight home to do chores and homework. The only fun I had was secretly texting my friends back in Manila about how horrible my life had become. But then I met David. He was the son of an American pastor who lived on the floor above us. We first bumped into each other in the communal garden where I sometimes went to read. He was 17, born in the Philippines but raised in the States, and had just moved back with his family. David was different from the strict missionary kids. He had this rebellious streak that I immediately connected with. We started hanging out in secret, meeting late at night when our parents were asleep. My room was next to my aunt's, and the walls were so thin I could hear her snoring. On the nights we planned to meet, I'd wait until around 1 in the morning when her snoring became regular and deep before sneaking out to meet David by the old bell tower. We never did anything crazy, just talked, shared snacks, and sometimes held hands while looking at the stars. It was innocent, but I knew my aunt would lose her mind if she found out. The night it happened was in August. It had been raining all day and the air was thick with humidity. The electricity had been spotty, going on and off because of the storm. I remember texting David earlier that we should still meet at our usual time, 1:30 in the morning. I had stolen some panda cocoa from the kitchen that I was planning to share with him. Around 1 a.m., I got up from my bed to check if my aunt was asleep. Usually I'd just listen for her snoring, but that night, for some reason, I couldn't hear anything. The rain had stopped and everything was eerily quiet. I grabbed a glass from my nightstand. I'd figured out this trick where I could press it against the wall and use it like a makeshift stethoscope to hear better. I pressed the glass against the wall, separating my room from my aunt's, and put my ear to it. Instead of snoring, I heard murmuring. At first I thought maybe my aunt was praying. She sometimes did late-night prayer sessions when she was stressed about something, but then I realized there were two distinct female voices. I froze. My aunt lived alone, and she never had visitors this late. I put the glass down and pressed my ear directly against the wall. The voices became clearer, but what I heard made my skin crawl. I couldn't understand a word being said, despite being fluent in both Tagalog and English. The language was completely foreign. The voices were speaking in low, rhythmic tones. There was something ancient and formal about the way they spoke, almost like Latin, but definitely not Latin. I'd heard Latin in church. This was something else entirely. The sounds had these weird inflections that didn't sound natural, like the voices were forcing their tongues to make sounds that human mouths weren't designed for. I stood there for what felt like forever, just listening. The conversation, if you could call it that, had no pauses like normal people talking. It was continuous, with one voice speaking and then the other immediately responding, sometimes overlapping. There was no laughter, no change in tone, just this monotonous, unsettling exchange. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and texted David, "Can't meet tonight. Something weird happening. Talk tomorrow." I crawled back into bed and pulled the covers over my head like a little kid. I didn't sleep at all that night. The voices continued for about an hour, then suddenly stopped. Not like people finishing a conversation and saying goodbye. They just cut off mid-sentence. The silence afterward was almost worse than the voices. Morning came, and I was exhausted and on edge. I got dressed and went to the kitchen, expecting to see my aunt, hoping she'd explain who had been in her room. But she wasn't there. I checked the bathroom, the living room. No sign of her. Her bedroom door was open, which was unusual. She always kept it closed. I hesitantly looked inside. Her bed was made, untouched. It looked like no one had slept in it. Just then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Aunt Mariela. "Good morning, anak. Hope you're doing okay on your own. Just checking in. Conference going well. See you tomorrow evening." My blood ran cold. I called her immediately. "Tita, where are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I told you before I left, Sophia. I'm at the Regional Pastors Conference in Lipa. I've been here since yesterday morning. I'll be back tomorrow evening." I felt dizzy. You weren't home last night?" "No, Anak. Is everything okay? You sound strange." "Everything's fine," I lied. "I just forgot you were away." After hanging up, I sank to the floor, my legs too weak to hold me. If my aunt wasn't home last night, then whose voices had I heard in her room? I texted David and asked him to meet me in the garden. When I told him what happened, he suggested we check my aunt's room together. Part of me didn't want to go back in there, but I needed to know if there was some logical explanation. We searched the entire room. Nothing seemed out of place. No signs that anyone had been there. David checked the windows, all locked from the inside. The only way in or out was through the main door, which had been locked when I woke up. I had to use my key to get out that morning. "Maybe it came from another apartment," David suggested. "Sound travels weirdly in these old buildings." But I knew what I'd heard. The voices had been clear, close, and definitely coming from that room. That afternoon, I asked one of the older missionary wives, Mrs. Santos, about the building's history. She'd been living there for over 20 years. I tried to be casual, saying I was doing a school project on historic buildings. "Oh, this place has quite a history," she said, pouring me some iced tea. "Before it was a missionary campus, it was a hospital during World War II. And before that, in the Spanish era, they say it was some kind of administrative center." "Did anything unusual ever happen here?" I asked. She gave me a strange look. "What do you mean by unusual?" "I don't know. Like, do people ever talk about hearing or seeing things? Ghost stories, that kind of stuff?" Mrs. Santos became very still. "Why do you ask, Sophia? Has something happened?" I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Just curious for my project." She sighed and lowered her voice. "There have been stories. especially about the East Wing where you and your aunt live. Some say they've heard chanting at night. Others claim to have seen a woman in white walking through walls. But these are just stories. The East Wing. That's exactly where our apartment was. Has anyone ever identified what language the chanting was in? I asked, my mouth dry. Mrs. Santos looked uncomfortable. Some of the older missionaries thought it might be an ancient dialect from this region. Others said it wasn't Filipino at all, but something older. One of the American linguists who stayed here in the 80s became obsessed with recording it. He claimed it predated any known language in the Philippines. What happened to him? He left suddenly. Mental breakdown, they said. His recordings were never found. I couldn't sleep in the apartment that night. I made up an excuse to stay with a classmate. When Aunt Mariella returned the next day, I didn't tell her what happened. What could I say? That I heard voices in her empty room speaking in some prehistoric language. For the rest of my time in Batangas, I never heard the voices again. But I also never used the glass against the wall or pressed my ear to it. Some things are better left unheard. I moved back to Manila after graduating high school. Aunt Mariella still lives in that same apartment. Sometimes when we talk on the phone, I want to ask her if she's ever heard anything strange, but I always chicken out. David and I kept in touch for a while, but eventually lost contact when he moved back to the States for college. The last time we spoke, he admitted that he'd gone back to my aunt's apartment building a few times after I left, trying to hear what I'd heard. He never did. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened. Who were those women? What language were they speaking? How could voices exist in an empty, locked room? Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. But then I remember the distinct rhythm of their speech, the inhuman cadence, the way the voices suddenly cut off, and I know it was real. Whatever I heard that night wasn't meant for living ears, and sometimes in my dreams, I still hear fragments of that conversation, echoing from beyond walls that shouldn't be able to contain such ancient sounds. Story 18. I've been a paranormal investigator for about 7 years now. I want to make it clear that I'm not some psychic or medium. I'm just a regular guy who approaches these investigations with a healthy dose of skepticism and some basic equipment. I've always prided myself on keeping a level head during investigations, looking for logical explanations before jumping to supernatural conclusions. That was until last October, when something happened to me that I still can't explain. It was supposed to be a routine investigation at Guy's Cliff House in Warwick. If you're not familiar with the place, it's this massive old mansion dating back to the 18th century with a pretty dark history. The place has been everything from a private residence to a hospital during World War II, and it's got this creepy, oppressive feeling the moment you walk in. I'd been there twice before and had some interesting experiences. Cold spots, unexplained noises, the usual stuff. But nothing that couldn't potentially be explained away. This time was different though. I went with my mum, who's always been interested in the paranormal, my brother Tom, who was visiting from Manchester and wanted to tag along, and another regular from our investigation group, a woman named Sarah, who's been doing this longer than I have. We arrived around 7 in the evening when it was already dark outside. The tour guide met us at the entrance. A friendly older guy named Martin, who'd been running night tours there for years. He gave us the usual safety briefing and history of the place, though I'd heard it all before. I remember feeling unusually on edge that night, which I chalked up to not sleeping well the night before. The main activity planned was a séance in one of the upstairs rooms that was supposedly the most active. It used to be some kind of drawing room with high ceilings and these massive windows that looked out onto the grounds. The séance was being led by a medium named Claire, who was visiting from London. I'd never met her before, but Sarah vouched for her. We all gathered around this huge oak table in the center of the room. There were about 9 of us in total. Me, Mum, Tom, Sarah, Claire, Martin, and 3 other people whose names I can't remember now. The only light in the room was this small ceiling light that wasn't supposed to be on. Martin had accidentally flipped the switch when we came in, and then decided to leave it on dimly rather than plunge us into complete darkness. Claire started the séance in the usual way, asking for protection, setting intentions, all that stuff. I was sitting between Mum and Tom with my hands placed flat on the table. The first 30 minutes or so were pretty standard. Claire was asking questions into the darkness, and there were a few creaks and bangs that got everyone excited, but nothing I hadn't heard before in old buildings. But then I noticed something odd. Claire kept asking if I was okay. "Lucas, are you all right?" she asked, looking directly at me. "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied, a bit confused. I hadn't said or done anything to suggest otherwise. A few minutes later, she asked again, "Lucas, are you sure you're okay?" Again, I confirmed I was fine, though I was starting to feel uncomfortable with the attention. I glanced at Mum, who was looking at me with a slightly concerned expression. The third time Claire asked, I remember feeling irritated. "I'm fine, really," I said, perhaps a bit more firmly than necessary. That's the last thing I clearly remember for what I'm told was about 15 minutes. My next memory is of Claire's voice, but it wasn't calm anymore. She was practically shouting in my ear, "Come forward. You need to come forward now." I blinked, feeling disoriented and cold, really, really cold. My entire body was shivering. "Be left alone," Claire was saying loudly. "You must leave him be." I remember trying to speak, but my mouth felt weird, like my tongue was too big. Everyone around the table was staring at me with expressions ranging from concern to outright fear. Tom had his hand on my shoulder, shaking me gently. "What's happening?" I finally managed to say. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hoarse, as if I'd been shouting. Claire looked at me intently. "Are you back with us, Lucas?" I didn't go anywhere," I said, confused. But apparently, I had. According to everyone at the table, about 5 minutes after Claire had asked me if I was okay for the third time, I'd suddenly gone completely still. My eyes had rolled back in my head, showing only the whites, and I'd become completely unresponsive. Tom said he'd tried to shake me, but I was rigid, like my muscles had locked up. Claire had immediately said that something or someone was trying to communicate through me. She said she could sense it was the hangman, apparently a spirit known to haunt Guy's Cliff House. From what Martin explained afterward, the hangman wasn't actually a ghost of someone who had died there, but rather the spirit of a man who had worked as an executioner in Warwick during the 18th century. His job had been to escort the condemned from the jail to the gallows and carry out the hanging. According to the legend, he now wanders the grounds of Guy's Cliff, possibly because he couldn't find peace after all the lives he'd taken. Mum said that while I was in this state, I hadn't spoken, but my breathing had become very deep and ragged. Sarah claimed she saw a dark shadow standing behind my chair, though no one else reported seeing this. Claire had apparently started addressing this hangman entity directly, asking it to leave me alone and find another way to communicate. That's when I started coming back to consciousness and heard her shouting those instructions. After I came back, as they put it, the séance was pretty much over. Everyone was too shaken up to continue, especially me. I felt exhausted, like I'd run a marathon, and I had this splitting headache right behind my eyes. Martin brought me some water and suggested we call it a night, but the strangest part was yet to come. As we were packing up to leave the room, I felt this overwhelming urge to stay. It wasn't just a thought or a preference. It was a powerful compulsion, almost painful in its intensity. I needed to stay in that room, sit at that table, alone. I can't explain why or what I thought would happen, but it felt absolutely crucial that I do this. I actually made an excuse to go back into the room alone, telling the others I'd left my phone on the table. When I got back in there, I stood by the table, feeling this bizarre pull to sit down in the same chair. I probably would have, but Tom came looking for me after I'd been gone for a few minutes. "You all right, mate?" he asked, standing in the doorway. I snapped out of whatever trance I was in and nodded, quickly grabbing my phone, which had been in my pocket the whole time, and leaving the room. But the urge to return stayed with me the entire night. Even as we drove home, I felt like I'd left something important behind, something unfinished. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the drawing room and that table. I kept feeling like someone was standing over my bed watching me. I eventually turned on all the lights in my bedroom and kept them on until morning. The next few weeks were rough. I had broken sleep every night, waking up at exactly 3:15 in the morning without fail. I started sleeping with the lights on, something I've never done in my adult life. I felt constantly on edge, like something was following me or watching me from just out of sight. It wasn't that I was seeing or hearing things. It was more this constant feeling of unease, like when you think you've left the stove on or forgotten to lock the door. Except it wasn't about anything specific, just this nagging sense that something wasn't right, that something was unfinished. I spoke to Claire on the phone about a week after the incident. She said that sometimes spirits can form attachments to people who are open or vulnerable in some way. She suggested I might have been more susceptible that night due to my tiredness. She recommended I cleanse my living space with sage and verbally state that no spirits were welcome to attach to or communicate through me. I'm not usually one for that kind of thing, but I was desperate enough to try it. I don't know if it was the sage ritual or just time passing, but after about a month, the feelings started to fade. The compulsion to return to Guy's Cliff House gradually diminished, and I started sleeping through the night again. It's been almost a year now, and I haven't been back to Guy's Cliff House. I've continued with other investigations, but nothing like that has happened again. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night with the memory of that evening vivid in my mind, and I wonder what really happened to me in those 15 missing minutes. The rational part of me wants to believe it was just some kind of dissociative episode brought on by suggestion and the atmosphere of the place. But then I remember the intensity of that urge to return to the room, the bone-deep cold I felt when I came back, and the weeks of unease that followed. Those feelings were real, whatever caused them. I don't know if I was possessed by the hangman that night. I don't know if such things are even possible. But I do know that something happened to me at Guy's Cliff House that I can't explain. And it's changed how I approach paranormal investigations forever. I used to be looking for proof that ghosts exist. Now I'm not so sure I want to find it. Others. Story 19. I've been hesitating to share this for months now. Part of me still can't process everything that happened. And another part worries you'll all think I'm completely mental. But I need to get this off my chest, and this seems like the only place where people might actually understand. About 8 months ago, my husband Marcus and I moved into what seemed like the perfect flat in Hackney. We'd been hunting for ages, and when we finally found something in our budget that wasn't the size of a shoebox, we jumped on it. The landlord seemed a bit eager to rent it out, which should have been my first red flag, but I was just relieved to finally have a place of our own. From the moment we walked through the door with our first boxes, something felt off. I can't explain it properly, but it was like walking into a room where people had just been arguing. You know that heavy feeling in the air? It was like that, but nobody had been living there for weeks, according to the letting agent. "Do you feel that?" I asked Marcus as we stood in the empty living room. He just shrugged and said, "Feel what? It's a bit chilly, maybe." Then he wandered off to check the radiators, completely oblivious. That's Marcus for you, practical to a fault. He doesn't believe in anything he can't see or measure. Ghost stories make him roll his eyes so hard I worry they'll get stuck that way. I've always been more sensitive to these things, but even I wasn't prepared for what was coming. That first night was when it all started. We were both exhausted from moving, so we just inflated our air mattress in the bedroom, had a takeaway curry, and crashed early. I fell asleep almost instantly, but then had the most disturbing dream I've ever experienced. I was in some kind of warehouse, all concrete and echoing emptiness. There was a woman standing with her back to me, blonde hair hanging limply down her back. When she turned around, her face was completely normal at first, but then I watched in horror as an upside-down pentagram began to form on her forehead, like it was being carved into her skin from the inside. Blood trickled down between her eyes. Then, and this is the part that still makes me feel sick, she twisted her body backwards, her spine bending in ways that aren't humanly possible, and started scuttling toward me like some horrific spider, screaming, "You can't break the devil!" over and over. I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat. The bedroom was freezing cold despite it being June. Marcus was tossing and turning beside me, clearly having his own nightmare. When I woke him, he looked genuinely frightened, something I'd rarely seen in our 5 years together. I was dreaming about people jumping off bridges, he mumbled, rubbing his face. Dozens of them, just stepping off and falling. I could hear the splashes. He shuddered. Christ, that was vivid. Marcus never has nightmares. Never. He's the type who falls asleep in 2 minutes and doesn't move until morning. So for him to have such a disturbing dream the same night I did, it wasn't a coincidence. I tried to brush it off as stress from the move, but over the next few days, things got progressively worse. I started feeling completely drained, like something was literally sucking the life out of me. I'd sleep 10, sometimes 12 hours and still wake up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. Getting out of bed became this monumental task. My body felt heavy, my thoughts foggy. Marcus was struggling too, though he wouldn't admit it. He'd snap at me over nothing, then apologize immediately, looking confused at his own behavior. We'd never been the type to bicker, but suddenly we were at each other's throats over the smallest things, whose turn it was to wash up, whether the windows should be open or closed, what to watch on telly. About 2 weeks in, I started seeing things. At first it was just glimpses from the corner of my eye, a shadow moving when nothing was there, a flash of what looked like a person walking past the bedroom door when I was alone in the flat. I told myself it was just my imagination. Then one evening while Marcus was working late, I was sitting on the sofa scrolling through my phone when I felt someone watching me. I looked up and saw a woman standing by the window, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed silently. She was transparent, like a photo that's been overexposed, but I could make out her 1940s style clothing and the way she kept looking out the window as if waiting for someone. I froze, unable to move or speak. After what felt like ages but was probably only seconds, she simply faded away. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The next day, I saw a little boy sitting cross-legged on the floor of our spare room. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, with short dark hair and sad eyes. Unlike the woman, he seemed to notice me. He looked directly at me for a moment before disappearing. I tried telling Marcus about these experiences, but he just looked at me with a mixture of concern and skepticism. You're exhausted," he said gently. "You're probably just seeing things because you're not sleeping properly. Maybe we should get you to the doctor." I knew what I'd seen wasn't due to lack of sleep, but I couldn't convince him, and truthfully, I was starting to question my own sanity. The flat itself seemed to be closing in on me. The walls felt like they were inching closer every day, the ceilings lower, even the air felt thick and heavy, like trying to breathe underwater. Then came the day that confirmed I wasn't imagining things. It was about a month after we'd moved in. I was walking home through our housing complex after picking up some groceries. It was a perfectly normal afternoon. People walking dogs, kids playing, the usual urban background noise. 1 second I was there, and the next, I wasn't. The world around me shifted. Instead of the brick buildings of our estate, I was suddenly standing amidst rubble and half-collapsed houses. The air was filled with dust and the smell of smoke. I could hear sirens wailing in the distance and people shouting. Where our complex should have been, there were bombed-out shells of buildings, some still smoldering. A woman ran past me, her face streaked with dirt and tears, calling out a name I couldn't quite catch. It lasted only seconds, but it felt eternal. Then, just as suddenly, I was back, standing on the path to our building, groceries still in hand, a concerned neighbor asking if I was all right because I'd stopped dead in my tracks with a weird look on my face. I mumbled something about feeling dizzy and hurried inside. Once in the flat, I went straight to my laptop and started researching the history of our area. What I found chilled me to the bone. During the Second World War, Hackney had been heavily bombed during the Blitz. The exact spot where our housing complex now stood had been hit particularly hard, with an entire street of houses destroyed in one night. Over 30 people had died, including several children. One account mentioned a mother who had been seen searching the rubble for days afterward, refusing to believe her son was dead. Our flat, I realized with growing horror, was built on what had been the most devastated area in all of London during that raid. The grieving woman by the window, the sad little boy. They made terrible sense now, but there was something else in the flat with them, something darker. I felt it most strongly in the bathroom of all places. One morning while I was showering, I felt a presence so strongly that I opened my eyes, expecting to see Marcus. Instead, through the steamy glass, I saw the outline of a man, much larger than Marcus, with massive hands. He didn't move or try to frighten me. He just stood there, radiating a sadness so profound it made my chest ache. When I blinked, he was gone, but I knew he'd be back. They all would. They were tied to this place somehow, caught in a loop of their final moments or their greatest griefs. By this point, Marcus couldn't deny something was wrong anymore. He'd started having frequent nightmares too, and admitted that he sometimes felt like someone was watching him. Our relationship was deteriorating rapidly under the strain. We were both constantly exhausted, irritable, jumping at shadows. I knew we needed to do something. We couldn't break our lease without losing a fortune, and finding another flat in London on short notice was impossible. So I turned to the only option I had left. I decided to cleanse the flat myself. I'd read about it online, people using salt and sage to clear negative energies. I felt a bit ridiculous buying white sage bundles and boxes of sea salt from the New Age shop in Camden, but I was desperate. The shop owner, seeing my stressed face, gave me additional advice about opening windows and doors to let trapped energies escape. The next day, while Marcus was at work, I went through the entire flat. I sprinkled salt in every corner, burned sage in every room, opened all the windows despite the chill autumn air. As I moved through the spaces, I spoke aloud, not really prayers, just heartfelt words, asking any spirits present to find peace and move on. "I know you're scared," I said to the empty spare room where I'd seen the little boy. "I know you're looking for your mum, but she's waiting for you somewhere else, not here. It's okay to go to her." By the bathroom where the large man had appeared. "I don't know what happened to you, but this isn't where you belong. There's nothing to be sad about anymore. You can let go now." And by the window, where the woman kept her vigil. "He's not coming back this way. But maybe he's waiting for you somewhere else. You don't need to keep watching." I felt completely mad talking to empty rooms, but as I continued, the strangest thing happened. The air began to feel lighter. The oppressive weight that had been crushing me for weeks seemed to lift slightly. By the time I finished the entire flat, I was crying, not from fear or sadness, but from relief. Something had changed. That night, Marcus came home and immediately noticed the difference. "Did you open the windows all day? It feels clearer in here somehow," he said, looking puzzled. We both slept through the night for the first time since moving in. No nightmares, no cold spots, no sense of being watched. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the flat transformed completely. We still occasionally felt presences, but they no longer seemed malevolent or sorrowful, just echoes, fading with time. The woman by the window appeared one last time, but she was smiling faintly before she disappeared. The little boy never returned. The large man in the bathroom made one final appearance, raising his hand as if in farewell before fading away. What I learned from all this is that what we perceive as evil or threatening is sometimes just suffering that needs acknowledgement. Those spirits weren't trying to harm us. They were desperately seeking attention, help, release. They'd been trapped in their worst moments for decades, and all they needed was for someone to recognize their pain. I still can't explain what happened in any rational way that would satisfy someone like Marcus. But I know what I experienced, what we both experienced, and I know that sometimes the walls between then and now, between the living and the dead, are thinner than we'd like to believe. Story 20. I've never shared this with anyone outside my family before. Even typing this makes my hands shake. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I need to get this off my chest because the memories have started coming back stronger lately. I was 6 years old the first time it happened. It's been with me for almost 30 years now. This thing, this void. I don't know what else to call it. It's not a shadow person or someone standing in darkness like other people describe. This is something else entirely. A rip in reality. A place where nothing exists. That first night is burned into my memory. I had gone to bed like normal, my dinosaur nightlight glowing in the corner, my stuffed bear tucked under my arm. I remember it was summer because my window was cracked open and I could hear crickets chirping outside. Something woke me up around 3 in the morning, a sound I'd never heard before, a deep guttural roar that seemed to vibrate through the walls of our house. I sat up in bed, confused and scared. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Then I looked out my bedroom window and I saw it standing under the street lamp across the road. It wasn't tall. It was enormous, maybe 8 feet high, but it wasn't its height that terrified me. It was what it was made of, or rather, what it wasn't made of. This thing looked like someone had cut a hole in reality. Not darkness, not shadow, just nothing. A complete absence of anything, shaped like a person. The only way I could even see its outline was because of how it distorted everything behind it, like looking through warped glass. In my dream, at least I thought it was a dream at first, I screamed for my parents. They came running in and my dad grabbed me while my mom turned on the lights. Dad held me tight and told me it was just a bad dream, but when I pointed out the window, his face went pale. He saw it too. Then things got worse. My dad put me down and went to the window. He stared at the thing, then turned to say something to my mom, but his words never came out. He just disappeared, like someone had erased him. 1 second he was there, the next, nothing. My mom started screaming, and then she vanished too. The roaring got louder, filling my head, and everything went black. I woke up screaming for real this time. My parents came running in and I clung to them, sobbing uncontrollably. They tried to convince me it was just a nightmare, but it felt so real. The terror stayed with me for weeks. About a month after that first nightmare, something even stranger started happening, but only at my grandmother's house. I'd be lying in the guest bedroom, almost asleep, when suddenly I'd feel like I was floating. I'd open my eyes and see myself still lying in bed. The first time it happened, I nearly wet myself from fear. I was somehow looking down at my own body from the ceiling. These out-of-body experiences always followed the same pattern. I'd float there for a few seconds, then feel something tugging at me, not physically but like a mental pull toward the front door of my grandmother's house. I always got the sense that something wanted me to come outside, something was waiting for me. I never made it to the door. I'd always snap back into my body with a jolt that made me gasp for air. The next day after these episodes, I'd be exhausted, like I hadn't slept at all. My grandmother noticed and would make me drink this horrible herbal tea that was supposed to ward off bad spirits. I drank it to make her happy, but whatever was happening to me wasn't something that could be fixed with tea. The sleep paralysis started when I was around 7. At first, it only happened once a year or so, always without warning. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, unable to move a single muscle. My eyes could open, but that was it. And every single time, that void creature was there. The first few episodes, it stood in the corner of my room, just watching. The air around it would crackle with static, like an old TV with no signal. That noise is something I'll never forget. A sharp, insistent crackling that seemed to get inside my head. Each time the paralysis happened, the void moved closer to my bed. By the time I was 10, it would be standing at the foot of my bed. At 12, it was beside my nightstand. I tried telling my parents, but they thought I was making it up for attention or having normal nightmares. They even took me to a doctor once who said it was just sleep paralysis and nothing to worry about. But they didn't see what I saw during those episodes. They didn't feel what I felt. The thing never touched me during those years, but its presence was enough. I developed insomnia because I was so terrified of falling asleep. My grades suffered. I became withdrawn. How could I explain to anyone what was happening to me? When I was 13, my parents divorced, and the episodes increased in frequency. I'd have them once every few months. By 16, I was experiencing them almost monthly. The static sound evolved too. It became deeper, more like a low electrical hum that vibrated my teeth. The last childhood encounter happened when I was 21. I had just started my first real job after college. I was stressed and exhausted all the time. For almost a year, I hadn't had a single episode, and I foolishly thought maybe I'd outgrown them. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling unbearably hot. My entire body was drenched in sweat, my sheets soaked through. Before I even opened my eyes, I knew it was back. I could feel the weight of its presence in the room. When I finally forced my eyes open, the void was standing directly beside my bed, looking down at me. But this time, it had changed. There was a single bright, burning red eye in the center of where its face should have been. Not a human eye, more like a glowing coal or a dying star. The entire room had a deep red haze to it, like everything was bathed in blood-colored light. The static noise had evolved again. It wasn't just a hum anymore, it was a voice. Deep, vibrating, almost subsonic. It spoke words I couldn't understand, in a language that hurt my ears. Each syllable felt like sandpaper being dragged across my brain. The strangest part was that I wasn't afraid. For the first time in all these years, I felt calm. I stared right back at that burning eye, and after a few moments, I simply closed my eyes and went back to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I felt different somehow, changed. I thought maybe it was over for good. I was wrong. 9 years passed without a single episode. I got married, bought a house, settled into a routine that felt safe and normal. I started to believe that what had happened to me as a child and young adult had just been an overactive imagination combined with stress and sleep disorders. I convinced myself it wasn't real. Then, 3 years ago, when I was 31, it came back, and it was worse than ever. My wife was away visiting her parents. I was alone in our house. I'd gone to bed around midnight after binge-watching some stupid show on Netflix. I woke up suddenly when the fan beside our bed turned off. The power hadn't gone out, the digital clock on the nightstand was still glowing, but the fan had stopped working. I sat up, still half asleep, and that's when I heard it, a quiet growl coming from under the bed. Not like a dog or any animal I'd ever heard. More like the sound of earth shifting during an earthquake, but concentrated and intentional. My blood turned to ice. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I sat there frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Finally, I managed to convince myself it was just the house settling or my imagination. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, keeping my feet well away from the space underneath, and walked to the bedroom door. When I opened it, everything went to hell. The roar, that same roar from when I was 6 years old, hit me like a physical force. Everything turned red, that same deep crimson from my last encounter. I slammed the door shut and backed away, but when I turned around, I was still standing at the door, like I had never moved at all. I opened the door again. Same roar, same red light. I shut it, turned around. I was still at the door. I was trapped in some kind of loop. Panic set in. I tried screaming, but no sound came out. I tried pinching myself, slapping my face, anything to wake up. Nothing worked. After what felt like the 20th time opening that damn door, something changed. I felt sharp claws drag down the back of my neck, burning like fire. The pain was excruciating and completely real. I jerked awake in bed, gasping for air, drenched in cold sweat. The fan was running. The room was normal. I reached back to touch my neck, certain I'd find blood, but there was nothing there. No marks, no pain, but I could still feel where those claws had been. My wife found me the next morning sitting in the kitchen, staring at nothing. I couldn't tell her what happened. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? Our marriage had already been struggling. We were fighting constantly about everything and nothing. This was just one more thing I kept to myself. We divorced 6 months later. The marriage had been toxic for both of us long before that night, but after my encounter with the void, I couldn't pretend anymore. Something about facing that thing again made me realize I couldn't keep living a lie. I'm 34 now, and I haven't seen the void entity since that night. Part of me hopes it's gone for good, but deep down, I know better. It's waiting. I think it feeds on vulnerability and fear. It came for me as a child when I was helpless. It returned during my parents' divorce when my world was falling apart. It showed up again when my marriage was failing. It waits for me to be at my weakest, and then it strikes. I've moved to a new city, started a new job, begun therapy. I sleep with the lights on most nights. I've researched sleep paralysis, night terrors, hallucinations, anything to explain what I've experienced. Nothing fits exactly. Sometimes I wonder if I'm crazy, but then I remember the burning eye, the static voice, the claws on my neck, the absolute certainty that what I was seeing wasn't human, wasn't even of this world. I don't know what it wants from me. I don't know why it chose me. All I know is that I'm terrified of when it might return, because each time it comes back, it gets closer. Each time it becomes more real, more physical. What happens when there's no more distance between us? What happens when the void finally takes me? I'm writing this down as a record, I guess. So if something happens to me, someone might understand. Or maybe I'm just trying to convince myself I'm not losing my mind. Either way, if you've ever seen something similar, a void in the shape of a person with that burning red eye, please let me know. I need to know I'm not alone in this. I need to know there's a way to make it stop, because I can feel it even now as I'm typing this. That familiar pressure in the air, that electric feeling that precedes its arrival. I think it knows I'm talking about it. Story 21. I still get chills thinking about what happened at Dylan's house. This was about 4 years ago, right after I graduated high school. I've never told the full story to anyone except my therapist, but I need to get this off my chest because it still haunts me. My home life wasn't great back then. My parents were going through a nasty divorce, and our house felt like a war zone. I started spending more time at my friend Dylan's place just to escape the constant fighting. Dylan and I weren't super close in high school, but we had similar interests in video games and music, so hanging out at his place became my refuge. The first few months were normal. Dylan's house wasn't anything special, a rundown 2-story with an attic in Westfield. His family situation was pretty messed up too. His dad struggled with addiction and was barely functional. The house was always a disaster. Dirty dishes piled up, clothes everywhere, and this persistent smell I could never quite place. But compared to the emotional minefield at my place, it felt safer somehow. Dylan had his own issues. He was a bit odd, kept to himself a lot. I'd catch him sometimes staring intensely at nothing or whispering to himself when he thought I wasn't paying attention. He had this collection of weird trinkets in his room, old locks, keys with no doors, and photographs of empty chairs. I never asked about it. Everyone's got their quirks, right? I usually crashed in their guest bedroom when I stayed over. It was small, but had a desk where I could set up my laptop, and Dylan's parents didn't mind me being there. The guest room was directly below the attic, which becomes important later. About 6 months into our friendship, things started getting weird. It was a Tuesday night, and Dylan had fallen asleep early. I was playing League of Legends in the guest room, headphones on, but volume low enough that I could hear if anyone called for me. Around 1 in the morning, I heard it for the first time. Footsteps directly above my head. These weren't normal footsteps. They sounded like someone wearing heavy boots, almost like what you'd imagine pirate boots would sound like. Thud, thud, thud. Dramatic and intentional. At first I thought it might be Dylan's dad, but I remembered he was passed out on the couch downstairs. Dylan's mom worked nights, and his younger sister was at a sleepover. I paused my game and just listened. The footsteps continued, pacing back and forth directly above me. What freaked me out was how they seemed to follow my movements. When I shifted in my chair, they'd stop, then start again, mirroring where I was in the room. At one point, I even thought about moving to the left side of the room, and before I physically moved, the footsteps shifted to that exact spot. After about 5 minutes, they suddenly stopped. I sat frozen, waiting. Then came the worst part. A bang against the closet door so violent that my desk shook. It sounded like someone had punched it from inside the closet. I nearly pissed myself, but somehow managed to stay quiet. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in that chair until morning, too terrified to even check the closet. When Dylan woke up, I casually asked if anyone else was home last night or if they stored anything in the attic. He looked at me weird and said no one had been up there in years because the pull-down ladder was broken. I should have stopped going over after that, but my home situation was still unbearable, and I convinced myself it was just the old house settling, or maybe raccoons in the attic. But deep down, I knew better. Over the next few weeks, I experienced more incidents. The footsteps became a regular occurrence, always when I was alone in the room. Sometimes they'd start as light tapping, like someone testing the floor, before developing into those heavy, deliberate thuds. Other times they'd race across the ceiling like someone was running full speed, only to stop directly above me. One Saturday morning, about a month later, Dylan had gone to his part-time job at the mall. I was alone in the house except for Dylan's dad, who was passed out again. I was watching YouTube videos when I heard aggressive running footsteps cross the entire length of the attic. They stopped directly above my head, and then it sounded like someone dropped a heavy weight onto the floor. The ceiling light fixture swayed slightly. I grabbed my phone, ready to call Dylan, when I heard what sounded like dragging, followed by more footsteps, this time slower and more methodical. When Dylan got home, I finally convinced him we should check out the attic. He seemed reluctant but agreed. We pulled down the ladder, which wasn't actually broken, just stiff, and climbed up. The attic was dusty and filled with old furniture and boxes, but nothing that explained the noises. As we were about to leave, I noticed something in the far corner, directly above the guest room, a black box about the size of a shoebox. I pointed it out to Dylan, but he just shrugged and said it was probably old family stuff. He seemed uncomfortable and rushed us back downstairs. We never talked about it again. The incidents continued, becoming more frequent and intense. One night, I heard what sounded like whispering coming from the vent near the ceiling. Another time, all the drawers in the desk slowly opened on their own while I was trying to sleep. I started making excuses not to stay over, but sometimes it was unavoidable. Things came to a head about 8 months into our friendship. Dylan's family was going on a weekend trip to visit relatives, and they asked me to house sit and take care of their dog, Peter. Peter was a good dog, a golden retriever mix who was usually pretty chill. I agreed, thinking maybe without Dylan's family there, whatever was happening might stop. I was so wrong. I arrived Friday evening after they'd left. Peter seemed on edge right away, which was unusual for him. He kept staring into empty corners and whining. I tried to distract myself by ordering pizza and watching Netflix in the living room. Peter curled up beside me. Around 11 that night, Peter suddenly shot up and started barking frantically at the hallway that led to the bedrooms. There was nothing there that I could see, but he was going absolutely ballistic, hackles raised, teeth bared at something invisible. I grabbed Peter's collar and tried to calm him down, but he kept growling and backing away from whatever he was seeing. Eventually, he stopped, but he refused to leave my side for the rest of the night. I ended up sleeping on the couch with all the lights on. Peter pressed against me, occasionally growling at nothing. Saturday was quiet during the day. I took Peter for a long walk, cleaned up a bit, and tried to convince myself that last night was just Peter being weird. As evening approached, my anxiety grew. I decided to sleep in the living room again rather than the guest bedroom. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to those familiar footsteps, not in the attic this time, but in the hallway upstairs. Peter was already awake, staring intently at the staircase, but not barking, just watching. The footsteps moved from room to room upstairs, opening and closing doors. Then they started coming down the stairs, one slow step at a time. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear as the invisible footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and started moving across the living room floor. Peter was now growling low in his throat. The footsteps circled the couch where we were lying, and I swear I felt something brush against my exposed arm, like cold, dry fingers. Suddenly, all the lights in the house flickered and Peter started barking again. The footsteps retreated quickly up the stairs, and then silence fell. I sat awake for the rest of the night, clutching Peter and a kitchen knife I'd grabbed, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. Sunday morning, the last day I had to be there, I went to feed Peter and found something that still makes my skin crawl. His food bowl, which I'd left in the kitchen the night before, was now sitting in the middle of the living room floor, overflowing with dog food, way more than I had put in there. The bag of dog food was still sealed in the pantry where I'd left it. No one else had keys to the house. No one else was supposed to be there. I grabbed Peter, threw my stuff in my carelessly, and left immediately. I called Dylan from my car and made up some excuse about a family emergency. I never told him what really happened. After that weekend, I never went back to Dylan's house alone. Our friendship gradually drifted apart after high school anyway, as these things often do. Last I heard, his family finally moved out a year later. Dylan never mentioned experiencing anything strange himself, and I never had the courage to ask. To this day, I don't know what was in that house or why it seemed to focus on me. Was it connected to that black box in the attic? Was it somehow feeding off the negative energy of Dylan's troubled home? Or was it something about me that attracted it? All I know is that 4 years later, I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear those heavy footsteps above my bedroom, and I have to remind myself that I live in a one-story apartment now. There can't be anything up there. At least that's what I tell myself. Story 22. I never believed in hauntings or paranormal stuff. I was always the practical one, the one who found logical explanations for everything. That changed after we moved to Pinecrest last year. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened to us there, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever will. My husband Thomas and I were so excited when we found the house. It was in a nice suburban neighborhood, had a big yard for our dog Max, and was priced well below what we expected for the area. The previous owners seemed nice enough, a bit standoffish maybe, but we didn't think much of it. They mentioned they were moving for a job opportunity, and we were just happy to have found such a great place. The first few months were completely normal. We settled in, unpacked our stuff, and started making the place our own. Thomas commuted to his accounting job downtown, while I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer. Max loved the backyard. He's a golden retriever mix, super friendly, and always up for playing fetch. It was about 6 months after we moved in when the first really strange thing happened. I was working in my home office when I heard Max scratching at the back door to come in. This wasn't unusual. He often went outside for a bit and then wanted back in. But when I opened the door, I immediately knew something was wrong. Max seemed off. He wasn't acting like he was in pain, but he was quieter than normal. When he laid down on his bed, I noticed a dark stain on his fur. When I checked, I found this massive, gaping wound on his stomach. It was like nothing I'd ever seen, clean-edged, deep, but barely bleeding. He wasn't whimpering or showing signs of distress, which made no sense given the severity of the injury. I freaked out and rushed him to the emergency vet. The vet was baffled. She said it didn't look like an animal attack, no teeth marks or tearing, and it didn't match any kind of injury from jumping a fence or getting caught on something. It was almost surgical in its precision. Max needed over 20 stitches and antibiotics, but he recovered fine physically. The thing that kept me up at night was that our backyard is completely fenced in. There was no blood anywhere in the yard. I checked thoroughly. No signs of another animal, no broken fence pieces. Nothing that could explain what happened. Thomas suggested maybe Max had somehow injured himself on something we missed, and I tried to believe that because the alternative was too unsettling. Life went back to normal for a while, but I found myself checking on Max constantly when he was in the yard. I started accompanying him outside more often, just to keep an eye on him. He never showed any fear of going outside, which was strange if something out there had hurt him. About 6 months after Max's injury, Thomas and I went out for dinner. We were only gone for maybe 2 hours. When we pulled into our driveway, the garage door was wide open. We definitely hadn't left it that way. Inside the house, every single light was on. And I mean every light, even in closets and the attic. The basement door, which we always kept locked because we rarely went down there, was standing open. Thomas went through the whole house while I stayed with Max in the car. He didn't find anyone inside, and nothing was stolen. We tried to convince ourselves that we must have been forgetful. Maybe we hit the garage door opener accidentally as we left. Maybe we'd been turning on lights earlier and forgot to turn them off. The basement door was harder to explain away since we both remembered checking it was locked before leaving, but we still tried to rationalize it. We changed the locks the next day, and Thomas installed a security system. For a while, that made me feel better, but that feeling didn't last. Last week is when things got really bad. I was home alone. Well, alone, except for Max. Thomas was on a 3-day business trip. I was in the kitchen washing dishes after lunch. Max was sleeping in the living room. I could see him from where I stood at the sink. I turned around to grab a dish towel, and that's when I saw it. There was a puddle of red liquid on the kitchen floor, right in the middle of the room. It wasn't there seconds earlier when I'd walked to the sink. It looked exactly like blood. Dark red, slightly viscous, but it had appeared out of nowhere. There was no dripping from the ceiling, no trail leading to or from the puddle. It was just there. I froze, trying to process what I was seeing. Max was still asleep in the living room, so it couldn't have been from him. I was fine. No injuries. The puddle was maybe the size of a dinner plate, and it looked wet and fresh. I grabbed some paper towels and carefully dabbed at it. It looked like blood, but it had no smell at all. Nothing metallic, nothing chemical, just nothing. I checked Max thoroughly, his mouth, his paws, his body, but found nothing. He was completely fine and didn't even seem interested in the substance. I cleaned it up, my hands shaking the whole time. I called Thomas, but he was in meetings all day and didn't answer. I took photos before cleaning it, but they didn't really capture how unsettling it was. I spent the rest of the day on edge, jumping at every noise. That evening, I ran to the grocery store to pick up something for dinner. I was gone maybe 20 minutes. When I pulled back into our driveway, I saw lights on in the house. Lights I was absolutely certain I had turned off. I sat in the car for a few minutes, trying to work up the courage to go inside. When I finally did enter, the house was warm. Too warm. The fireplace was on full blast. The TV in the living room was blaring some random channel, and worst of all, when I went into the kitchen, the gas oven was on but not lit, just pumping gas into the house. Max was agitated, pacing and whining. I quickly turned everything off, opened all the windows, and took Max outside until the gas dissipated. Standing in my backyard looking at my house, I felt this overwhelming sense of dread. Something was wrong with our house. Something wanted to hurt us. I stayed at my sister's that night, and when Thomas came home the next day, I made him go through the house with me. Everything seemed normal in the daylight, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That's when we decided to do some digging into the house's history. We found out the previous owners had only lived there for 3 years, and the owners before them, just 1 year. That's not normal in Pinecrest, where most people buy homes to settle down long term. We couldn't find any records of deaths or violent crimes at the address, but the pattern of short-term ownership was disturbing enough. People had been fleeing this house, and now I understood why. The incidents have been escalating. It started with Max's injury. Horrible, but something we could almost explain away. Then the open doors and lights. Creepy, but maybe just a break-in attempt. But the blood appearing out of nowhere, the appliances turning themselves on when I was gone, in a way that could have caused a fire or gas poisoning. That's beyond coincidence or rational explanation. Yesterday, I was alone in the house again while Thomas was at work. I was in our bedroom folding laundry when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Max, who was on the bed next to me, started growling, something he never does. His eyes were fixed on the bedroom door, his hackles raised. The footsteps stopped right outside our bedroom. I could see the shadow of feet under the door. Max was going crazy now, barking and snarling. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but before I could, the doorknob started to turn slowly. I'm not ashamed to say I panicked. I grabbed Max's collar, ran into our bathroom, and locked the door. I called Thomas, crying hysterically. He left work immediately and called the police on his way home. When the police arrived, they found no one in the house. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing out of place. But I know what I heard, and Max's reaction confirmed it wasn't just in my head. We're staying with Thomas's parents right now while we figure out what to do. We can't sell the house in good conscience without disclosing what's happened, which means we'll take a huge financial hit, but I can't go back there. I just can't. I keep thinking about that blood-like substance appearing out of nowhere, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed in the house longer that night. Would more blood have appeared? Would I have found the source, or would it have found me? I don't know if our house is haunted, or if there's something else going on that I can't explain. All I know is that something in that house wishes us harm, and it's getting better at showing us just how much.